the meeting to order. Are there any items to be added to today's agenda? Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have three OB items which were communicated to the clerk's office. Under OB2, we have buses for Burke Mountain, raised by Councillor Lodge. We have Dogwood Pavilion, which is raised by Councillor O'Neill, and Breweries, also raised by Councillor O'Neill.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you. The next item is the minutes of the Council Committee meeting of Monday, September 15th. Recommendation to approve.
So moved. Second.
Favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 2 is a delegation. I invite Ms. Herschel Hardin to speak about the Riverview Village proposal for the Riverview land.
Okay, now that we've pretended to start the meeting, we'll start it now. Let's let Councillor Reed Yes, it is. Mr. Hardin, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Fascinating document you sent. We love it when our delegations send documents ahead to read.
I love it when people read, but I'm impressed by the coziness of this room and I think everybody can high. My name is Herschel Hardin. I'm the so-called coordinator of the Riverview Village project, a group of 5 people with a particular interest in using the Riverview lands to create a village community. I want to say first how much I appreciate not just being here, but the position the city has taken with the Riverview lands. Very forward-looking, high-minded position. And in fact, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't even bother working on this proposal with my colleagues. But you indicated that you had a public purpose in mind. You were concerned with the private concerns that and that was an encouragement for us to actually do what we have done. So thank you very much for the approach you've taken in your open minds. As you know from reading our document, Riverview Village, an innovative, groundbreaking community for the Riverview lands, we're proposing a multi-use community village of the seriously mentally ill, those who cannot cope in the urban landscape at large, that have a son with schizophrenia, doing not too badly in Marple. For those who can't cope in those circumstances, and for those who are well, roughly half and half, maybe starting with 40%, 40%. And it's sometimes called an intentional community with a purpose. In this case, to help those seriously mentally ill move forward, get past some very, very difficult residual symptoms or negative symptoms of schizophrenia, the schizophrenia that they have, such as anxiety, lack of motivation, often inability to organize, limited relationships with those who aren't ill, and isolation, even if they are clients of the community mental health team. So this is really quite an exciting concept to bring the power of an intentional community to bear, to help them along, most especially to build personal relationships and to engage them, and to give them a sense of belonging to something, belonging to other people and having those kinds of relationships. So that's the concept in a nutshell. I'm not going to elaborate, I don't have time in any case, on some of the details that are in the document, but we'll say that the more I think about it, the more excited I am. Because what we're proposing is something that isn't big concrete, that fits the feel of the Riverview lands, with which I'm quite familiar. My son had several soldiers there. And has a vibrancy to it. We're talking not just a mixed residential community, but a nice horticultural center and all other things. Just mention one last practical point, which is the revenue stream from the market housing. These are the people who are well, who will live in our proposed community and goes forward. include them to create the revenue stream. They're there because of the intentional community concept. It was very fortuitous also that it provided a revenue stream. So it was just one of those serendipitous combination of circumstances. So the two ideas fit very closely together. We do not see that revenue stream funding housing for the seriously mentally ill. We're going to try to insist that it be funded the way residences for the mentally ill are funded elsewhere. The community mental health support, which they'll get from service providers, will be funded the way it's funded now. The revenue stream we see for renovating the two Central Lawn and East Lawn buildings we'd like to keep, and for other expenses. So that's the proposal in a nutshell. I'll be meeting with the advisory committee later on in October, and if you think I should meet with your staff, and I've talked to a few of them, I'd be glad to sit down with them and discuss the concept in more detail and answer your questions if you have any.
Well, thank you very much. It's actually striking, and I'm going to read this out only because it's how striking I found it. We have that Herschel Hardin is an author, playwright, and former broadcaster, newspaper columnist, economic historian, lecturer, community organizer, public policy and strategic planning consultant, and corporate director. And that's only part of it. And so I recognize that you bring a wide range of experience to lots of issues, but not so much to this one. Your experience in this one is somewhat personal, somewhat involved in the community, the schizophrenia society, I guess, but also having visited the site for years and years. Do you speak in there here about this isn't institutionalization or deinstitutionalization, this is a third model. How well accepted is the third model, this model of, how well written about is it?
Well, as we describe it, it doesn't exist anywhere else. But it does exist in terms of the integration of the seriously ill, or not that seriously ill, in the urban communities at large, in Vancouver, North Shore, and I know here as well. Housing that isn't separated. Everybody's at Riverview. It's housing that is here and there within a city. And I was talking to Daryl Burnham, whom some of you might know, the executive director of Close Mental Health, a big housing organization. He chastised me for describing our proposal as experiment. He said it's already done. We're doing it all the time. We have people who live in our units, and sometimes in mixed buildings. The difference between that and what we're proposing is that the well who will come to the village and live in it will be committed to establishing relationships and supporting those who are seriously mentally ill. It's an intentional community. So that's the difference between what now exists throughout the Lower Mainland and the proposal we're putting forward.
Okay, well, there's a number of people that want to speak, and I do want to say that this is fascinating. I support entirely the concept, the basis for it. We're trying to open the discussion to this kind of wide-ranging philosophies about mental health and about how we take this site that is pretty much a jewel and use it for its best purpose in mental health and acute care as well, for that matter. So I thank you for coming to talk to us. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you very much for coming. Very interesting report. I want to know if you're aware of the BC housing visioning process that's underway right now. Do you intend to submit this to the BC housing visioning process for their consideration?
Yeah, we submitted it to BC Housing. It's now on their website.
They have their
two of us met with Michael Flanagan and somebody from Gary Puna's organization. And I did attend the last two open house sessions.
Great. Okay, I wanted to make sure you're aware of that. And of course, the city itself has submitted to the visioning process its own major report done by Dr. Higginbottom. Have you seen that report?
Yes.
Okay. And so that's sort of the city's official position right now, and he's a renowned expert in the area. And on the theme that the mayor took up on was, you've got a phenomenal resume, curriculum vitae. Nothing specific in this area other than personal experience. And indeed, when I was looking through your very learned, interesting, well-written report, I was looking for references, citations, things like that, references, footnotes that suggest that the things that you are proposing have some theoretical or practical background, that people have either demonstrated can work or suggesting it wants to work. Is there a body of information supporting this that I've missed? Or is this coming from you and your group, essentially just coming out of your own experiences?
Well, I want to say, first of all, that it's not just personal experience as regards mental illness that I've been involved, not just in the North Shore Schizophrenia Society, but on the board of the BC Schizophrenia Society for many, many years. Have worked with people across the country, write our advocacy bulletin, which is circulated across Canada, as we do elsewhere. And I've been involved for 20 years. And so I know the subject of serious mental illness upside down and backwards. And I would argue that we are every bit as much experts as anybody else in the field. We're not
every bit as much as Dr. Higginbottom?
Sure.
Really?
Not in the same way. Not in the same way. A slightly different kind of expertise based on the direction we come from. I know John. I've met him. I don't really know him very well. But
so he's had an entire career in this area, and he was hired by us to do this report because of his expertise.
Yeah, I know.
But you're every bit as credible?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. That's it.
Sorry, you were going
I have to be self-serving, but you raised the issue.
Okay, no, sure. I just want to know where you're coming from. That's fine.
Thank you very much for being here. Great report. However, we have a committee on Riverview land of council, which is Council Hardin and Council Neil Nicholson. And that's where we should be instead of here. We should be talking to them first, and if there's anything coming at their committee, then it would be referred to the committee of the whole, But however, I'll get away from that. Farming used to be very prominent in Riverview lands. They grew their own vegetables. They grew vegetables for the hospitals. They did the laundry for the hospitals. And you're talking about market housing.
Okay.
Not for 1 minute.
Why?
Because I can tell you something. We're not going to be destroying the piece of property market housing. There's lots of land for market housing. You don't have to take a land, a beautiful land, and the beautiful trees that are there. They're probably cut down and put things for market housing. I think the community is spoken out very loud and clear. We do not want any kind of market housing in the land. That's our residents in this community. Residents of other communities have said the same thing. Very, very simple. I know that that will cost money. But it's up to the provincial government to fund it. And they should be coming to the table. They close the place down, and they're downtown and go on Hastings and Lane for 3-4 blocks. It's become really, really ugly. Because you know why? These people can't look after themselves. There's nobody else to look after them. They're out on the street. And I think it's the wrong place to be. They should be in Riverview Hospital. And get their 3 meals, get their medication and everything else properly. But as far as I'll tell you something right now, that there is no way that I would support housing of any kind on that, affordable housing or market housing on that land. No way.
I'd like to respond, but if I may.
Yep, that's the idea. Go ahead.
I would much appreciate keeping an open mind as regards that component. If you follow John's recommendation, you have a big acute care tertiary facility. You have staff there, and you have a lot of patients. That the imprint of our proposal on the land would certainly be no greater. We certainly would not want any of the inherited operators to be affected. And if you look at the people who are well living in market housing as components of the therapeutic process that we're putting forward, what's the difference? Than having staff on the ground and all of the building and traffic that they would produce. So I wouldn't close my mind on market housing as a component, but think of it not in terms of market and housing and dollars. Think of it in terms of the intentional community we're trying to create for the seriously mentally ill. Not just for those who have had serious mental illness, but for that cohort that is the most seriously affected and can't manage out on the street.
Okay, Councillor Reid.
Thank you. My committee was the author of the report, the very first report. We worked on it for many years, I think since 2003 or 2005. And what we came up with, the original report, is probably what you started to read. I welcome some of your ideas here. I think some of them are ones we discussed at length, and it's nice to hear someone with feet on the ground experience. I think that always counts for a lot. I'm very much a fan of Dr. Higginbotham, very much. And he brings a different view, obviously the clinical view, which is also very important. But I'm a politician. And politicians, we're those folks that have to watch what the other politicians are doing. And if I open the door to this much market housing, I believe we'll be taking full advantage of opening the door wide, and not for the purposes you're looking for. The purposes you're looking for, what you've quoted has been happening in Belgium, I think is wonderful. But I don't know that that's what we did here. So I'm not in support of market housing, but I could certainly look at something that might incorporate some. But as a politician, I will never put Riverview lands at risk to have someone come in and say to me, oh, I will take 100 acres and turn it into a mental health facility, but you've got to give me the other 100 to put up apartments so we could afford to buy the first 100. And that will be over my dead body. Thank you.
Well, I agree with you about protecting the Riverview lands, but it wouldn't be putting the mentally ill here and the well here. They would be living together.
I understand your concept, and I appreciate getting it. Thank you.
Councillor Atkins.
Thank you very much for coming and making your presentation. It adds to the interest in Riverview what people have, and I think it from the City of Coquitlam has shown its commitment to those in need with mental health issues and our willingness to see Riverview be the best place it can be for mental health issues. We can only make proposals. We're not the owners of the land. The province owns the land. The province makes decisions on what they may do with the land. And that's where the visioning process is going on right now. So while we're here, and I thank you for coming to us and explaining your vision and your proposal, we're not the ones that make the decision whether that's going to happen or not. That's going to be up to the province to make their proposals and what they want to do with the land in the future, and that's why they're doing their visioning process right now. And there are other interests other than ours on the Riverview lands that they have to deal with and work through. Market housing has historically, and I'm not saying that it's not possible, but has been a historical issue with people in this community about not wanting market housing lands. Doesn't mean it won't happen. It's just something that has been a historical position of people. There was a floated idea about 4 years ago from the government about potentially putting market housing in, but quite a backlash the residents here. So, but those decisions are up to the province. This ties in some ways to our report from Dr. Higginbotham, which is, Councillor Neal said, is our hopeful position on Riverview moving forward. But we've had to submit that to the province, just like you're going to submit your application to deal through the province, their visioning process. That's what's going to determine what the province sees as the use of their land moving forward, and the interests that are tied to that.
I want to make it clear I'm not fighting against Dr. Higginbottom, and I sent him a document and he sent me a response, and he related to a lot of what we put forward as I related to a lot of what he put forward. And I do want to apologize for being here before the advisory committee. I did have some concern about doing it in this order, but I thought I should at least meet you and try to do that as quickly as possible. And I will be meeting with them, and we can discuss things in more detail.
Okay. Well, as the chair of the Riverview Lands Advisory Committee, and also as Councillor Sikor mentioned, Councillor Nicholson is the vice chair, I do look forward to your presentation to the committee. We'll have more time, and we'll have a number of stakeholders there. As you can see, I have read your report. I have lots of questions. I promised my colleagues I will not go through even probably more than two of these today. But first of all, I do want to thank you for being an advocate for mental health issues and for the time you've put in over the years, and for speaking up for people who may not necessarily be able to speak up for themselves. So I do appreciate that. A very interesting report. A lot of it that I do like, a lot of it I have concerns about. I'll probably hear those concerns as we move forward to the committee. It is interesting that what you're proposing, a community built around mental health, is essentially what we had in Riverview in 1949. It was a community back in the early 50s when it hit its peak. It was a community where people worked there, they lived there. We had all the amenities. We had recreation facilities. The patients came out on. We had sports days, parades. The staff and the patients mingled in the grounds, and it was a wonderful place and way ahead of its time in the way that it delivered mental health. The challenge that we have today is that if you were to have people living there, they wouldn't necessarily be the ones. Today, Riverview isn't out on a mountain, out on Mount Coquitlam the way it was. It was on the outskirts of the city. And people took a bus and they stayed out there for 2-3 days or lived out there because it was easier and more convenient for them. I don't know that today that you could mandate that you will live here and you will intermingle with the patients. I mean, more and more families now just completely, they drive out of their driveway, they come home, and getting people out, even in our communities today, to come out to walk parties and mingle is a challenge. And I think that's one of the things that when we have a chance to talk further, I would like to hear about, because I think your premise is based on non-patients living next to patients and creating that village. And I think it's a case of we want the provincial government has gone through a program of deinstitutionalization and bringing people out into the community. And in some cases that worked, but in other cases it did not work. And I think what you're proposing is bring the community to the patients. And that's a very, I don't want to make a proportion of it, it's a very interesting twist. We're going to bring the community to the patients. And I don't know that we can mandate that. Certainly that'll be a job that, your suggestion would rely heavily on whether the people who deliver mental health services in BC will buy into this. We're not the owner of the land, and we don't have the ability to determine who lives there or what gets, what mental health facilities are going to be built. We've come out and said we'd like to have a mental health facility. We believe there should be one here, but the form in which that facility takes is really going to be out of our hands. And I think your ideas are great. I think that that there's a visioning process that's underway right now. Some of what you said here is consistent with the pictures that I saw being drawn in those open houses last week that you and I both attended. So I look forward to having a more thorough discussion with many of those stakeholders and people who worked on the grounds and who are passionate about the grounds, and they'll all be there at our review meeting. And I look forward to being able to explore this further and see where there is some things we can do together. So I thank you for coming.
So do I. Look forward to it. And the issue you raised is one that we have discussed and grappled with. And rather than taking up your time here, I'll leave it for the advisory committee unless you want me to go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. I actually love it. The entire Lower Mainland right now is starting to talk about the site and looking at the site with new eyes, and this is always
Thank you.
we're just going to let council know we're having some audio difficulties. Discuss potentially relocate the meeting or just try and find going around and such. There's something wrong with that.
Okay. Recess.
Recess.
Go outside and play. I got my comment.
Hello?
It's like the great trek to UBC.
Yeah, let's go.
We're on the road again. Changing rooms and music, my friend. I just want to get back on the road.
Check 1 2 3. Check 1 2 3.
Okay, we'll reconvene. I probably don't have to explain why we've reconvened in a different room to our home audience. If you're watching this, you'll have recognized that we had a terrible cackle on the previous PA system, and the tape, undoubtedly, the archive tape will probably reflect that. We will undoubtedly have a better sound from in here, so in the interest of making sure the people at home can watch, we moved rooms. Mr. Clerk, we're on item 2, or 3, I believe.
Thank you, Your Worship. The next item concerns a large homes review. We have a presentation by the Manager of Building Permits Approvals and the staff recommendations to receive the report for information.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Reid, second by Councillor Asmundson. All in favor? Opposed? I recognize that. I noticed that Mr. McIntyre was... But anyway, we're certainly allowed to receive something and then receive more. So the motion carries. Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Worship, and good afternoon, Mayor Stewart and Council. Just a few opening remarks, and then I'll ask if Jim can go over to the podium, and if Council will indulge. We've got a presentation to go along with this report. Just very briefly, Your Worship, we've referred to as a large homes review has been of concern. Staff was tasked with going away and looking at this, which we have done. We've come back with some preliminary research for Council's information and consideration. What we found is, once you really start delving into this area, it's pretty technical and pretty complex. And so to assist with that, we're hoping that this presentation that Jim Bontempo, one of our building permits managers, will provide you will help properly inform in that area. So going along with the report, there is this presentation. If after that there's some questions from Council, we would welcome those. There's a fair bit of information that's been rolled into the report. We appreciate that. So if there's some items of clarification, certainly we can respond on that. But we're here for your information and ultimately your direction as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bontempo. There's a staff presentation. Is either the questions?
I want to wait.
Okay, got it.
Oh, I'll wait.
Thanks, Jim, and good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. This presentation is not intended to regurgitate the report. Rather, we felt that if we were able to explain how RS1 zone works today, currently, and some of its history, that perhaps that might help Council and members of the public produce good questions and good decisions. So this presentation is about providing context to the report. It's also intended to provide a baseline knowledge of how RS1 works. And then we can discuss some of the impacts of it and next steps. Over the last 2 years, we've received concerns from members of the public, people in southwest Coquitlam in particular, about concerns about new home building in their neighborhoods. This map shows predominantly areas of greater concern. What you see is southwest Coquitlam predominantly in areas and neighborhoods that were built in the 50s and the 60s, areas such as Harbor Chines, Austin Heights, Laurentian Heights, Chineside, and Ranch Park, and parts of the Marmont connector just above Millardville. Why are we receiving concern and complaints from these areas in particular? As I mentioned, housing stock built in the 50s and the 60s is now reaching the end of its life cycle. These homes were predominantly bungalow-style homes averaging about 2,400 square feet. These are traditionally large lots ranging from 8,000 to 10,000 square feet, following a subdivision pattern in the 50s that led to approximately 5 lots per acre. There's a high demand for quality living. The location is highly sought after in today's market. given that its geographic location in Metro Vancouver. There's also economic factors, and that is that there is a return on investment in these properties. We've all driven the streets of Coquitlam, and this is typical of the style of home. These are the types of homes that are being demolished today. Typically 1.5 story, what we call California bungalow style. It's a half basement type of home, typically 2,400 square feet, about 22 feet high. Air photo of a typical neighborhood in many parts of southwest Coquitlam. As you can see, the lot sizes in this area, this is not far from Mundy Park, 9240 in terms of square feet of the lot. As I mentioned, homes about 2,400 square feet. Interestingly enough, the site coverage of these homes is about 15%. Floor area ratio, and I'll get into that a little bit more in detail later. We don't calculate that on permits. However, just looking at these homes, you'd be about 0.26 FSR. And the average height of these homes is about 22 feet. And that's measured from grade to the peak of the roof. So here we are in a world of transition, and these are a couple of examples in southwest Coquitlam that show homes that have been built in the last 10 years. And I think we've all seen this in our community. Fairly larger homes, more modern building materials, modern style, adjacent to homes that in many cases have been renovated and still have some lifespan, but the scale is different. So I thought at this point I would run through RS1 zoning bylaw as it exists today and explain the various sections within it. So Section 1 talks about the intent of RS1, and it's fairly straightforward. The zone provides, obviously, for low-density single-family dwellings. Minimum lot size, 650 square meters. It's about 7,000 square feet, with its appropriate accessory uses. Permitted use, a principal use, a one-family, single-family home with accessory uses, such things as shops, garages, sheds, secondary suites. The conditions of use in RS1, there are only parking requirements as additional conditions of use, and just as a reminder that that's equivalent to 2 parking spaces per principal dwelling and 1 additional parking spot for a secondary suite. Talks about lot size, so the zoning bylaw prescribes a minimum lot area, 650 square meters, a minimum lot width of 13.5 meters, and a minimum lot depth, 22.7 meters. Of course, all of that can be exceeded, but not less than those figures. So when we talk about density, we're talking about 2 ways of measuring it. I think that most members of council are familiar with this one in particular. This measurement of density is talking about units per acre, and usually when we're talking about land use issues and rezonings and OCP amendments and those types of subject matters, we're usually talking about this kind of density. The density that pertains to single-family dwellings is another form of density calculation, and that essentially is what we call floor area ratio or floor space ratio. Really what it talks about is how much square footage of habitable space are you putting on that lot. Now, just some interesting points. RS1 in Coquitlam does not have floor space ratio, and I believe there's a table in the report that shows that approximately 50% of most municipalities do have that. Northeast Coquitlam has a form of FAR currently. It doesn't prescribe ratios, but it prescribes a maximum amount of floor area permitted on the lot. One word of caution is when you're comparing FSRs between municipalities, be careful that you're not comparing apples and oranges. Some municipalities include basements and others don't. Some include things such as balconies and garages and other things, some don't. So we must be very clear when we look at those ratios. Interestingly enough, this tool has been looked at by previous councils but never implemented. Another tool in the RS1 is lot coverage, and recently in 2011 an amendment was adopted by council for the first time, bringing in a lot coverage in RS1, and that lot coverage today is 45%. You're only permitted one principal dwelling on the lot. Setbacks. Our setbacks are fairly onerous when you compare to other municipalities. Essentially, on a typical lot, your front and rear yard is 25 feet or 7.6 meters. Your side yard is 1.8 meters, 6 feet. And an exterior side yard, in other words, a street that is adjacent to the side yard, if you're fronting a street, is 3.8 meters or 12.5 feet. Location of uses, there's only one tool that we use in location of uses, and that's where do we allow a secondary suite to reside within that dwelling. This regulation is fairly new. It came in the early, about 2002, 2003. Prior to that, suites were essentially secondary and basement suites. Today, our homes are bigger and more complex. Suites essentially could be on any floor, except that we've restricted it, that you must have habitable space of the principal dwelling above it. So the two pictures here show a couple of scenarios. The reason for that is council in the past felt that suites are permitted. They're a good part of our community, but they should be somewhat inconspicuous. Height. So buildings and structures, maximum height, 7.3 meters. Now that's for a roof that's considered low slope or flat, which is a pitch of 3 and 12 or less. Typically, most homes that you see are greater than that, and that's why you have a height limit of 11 meters. And that's for 80% of the roof surface, and it gets a bit complex, but I think you understand that point. So how do we measure height? Now, this is critical because, again, different municipalities measure height differently, and you'll always end up with a different number depending on how you calculate it. So essentially, as you know, the steeper the slope, there's going to be a lot of soil manipulation. Our practice and our regulations stipulate that we always take the grade from the lower of existing grade or proposed grade. So if you excavate, we'll go to the lower number. If you fill, we'll go to the lower number. Okay, that's to prevent manipulation of the site, essentially bringing in fill, building up the lot, and then building your house on top of a dirt podium. So this example shows how we measure it. What we do is we take the outermost corners of the proposed building envelope, we take the lower of existing or proposed grade, and we average it. And then from there, we add 11 meter height, or 36 feet, to the absolute maximum height of the building roof, which is the roof peak. Some municipalities go to the average roof slope, so midway on the roof. Others take it from the existing finished grade, whatever that may be. And as we all know, that some municipalities have difficulty with that because contractors have come in and filled their site and then built a home on top. So that can't occur in Coquitlam in RS1, not without us knowing. So a piece that came in about 1992 is that, if most of us recall, we were going through a large house or monster house era back in the 90s. And Coquitlam investigated that and addressed the concerns. Many people were asking for lower building heights, others were just asking for a smaller FSR, but planning and development at the time managed to look at a different avenue, and that is to bring in a consultant, i.e. the Hulbert Group, which is a group of respected architects, to look at maybe there's another way of modifying and bringing in restrictions that don't just outright reduce what you can build on the home, but perhaps modify and manipulate the way the finished product looks. And in a result, we got a section put into the bylaw called building size. Now this is unique, and no other municipality really addresses zoning in this way. We've had many municipalities look at our regs for reference and perhaps adoption on their own. Can be a bit complex. It takes a while for designers and the private sector to get used to, but after 15 years, I think we've got it. So principle, essentially it was brought in and recognizing we have steep slopes, and the downside slopes of single-family homes can be very abrupt and large faces facing single-family homes that exist. And really it was designed to look at infill compatibility. That is why the large house bylaw does not apply to northeast Coquitlam, because that is new development, and the regulations in RS 7 through 11 deal with large houses in other ways. So principal issues, it addressed that construction was wider and deeper than adjacent homes. New buildings have tall faces facing downslope. The rear yards are sacrificed for larger buildings, and that new construction appears bulkier. So the result was two tools: perimeter wall height and perimeter wall area. Perimeter wall height. So what really it was intended to prevent 3-story and taller on exterior slopes, walls on slope sites. We're looking at to encourage buildings to become more stepped as they work down with the topography. It's really looking at limiting overshadowing of sidewalls and to encourage features in the home. And we can get into some detail, but when you introduce dormers and articulated building faces and parapets and other issues, or features like dormers and turrets and things, it actually goes to your advantage in terms of your proposed design and being acceptable. The other piece to that is perimeter wall area, and there's a limit of 1,000 square feet on a wall face. Now, you can achieve that in many ways. Most homes would probably be larger than 1,000 square feet, if not finding very crafty and good design ways of reducing the 1,000 square feet by articulating your wall, creating shadow areas which are then subtracted from the calculation and so forth. Some examples, the top picture shows building circa 1980, pre the building size controls. And you can see the impact of that new building. Picture on the bottom shows something that is being built today. This is, if you have a look at that roof design, although the home is large, that the regulations have forced it to reduce its building wall size and its impact on its adjacent neighbor, as well as forced it to articulate the roof design. Perimeter wall area, the homes at the top, circa 1990, could not be built today. And the picture on the bottom shows a house that's had to articulate its side wall to respect the existing home. Through articulation, eyebrow roofs, different texture materials, so forth. Just threw this in as an example that here's an example of a very, very large home. I mean, this home is 7905 square feet, but the way it was sited and designed and sits on the lot, 2 lots were actually consolidated to create this lot. Just to give you a bit of understanding, this is an FSR of 0.49 with a site coverage of 19%. So if we look at going forward, ideas and ways of looking at the zoning bylaw, just some food for thought, we could investigate site coverage. The example coming from municipality of Surrey is that you could have a sliding scale where the lots that increase in size could actually reduce the applied site coverage. That's a tool. That would address the concern that buildings have large footprints. How do you address the concern that homes appear too bulky and large? You could look at floor area ratio. There are many different ways of addressing that issue. Here's one example. One of the questions that we have to ask ourselves, are homes too large because they are large homes, or is it the context of the neighborhood that they're in? Here's an example of a community that was built off of Walnut Crescent. I think about 30 or 40 new homes, all built at the same time. And these homes are 4,500 square feet. And but in context, these large homes work together on this crescent. River Heights was developed in 1987, pre our design controls, and here's a couple of examples of homes and what they equate to in terms of floor area ratio, 1.1 and 0.8, which is approaching densities of townhousing. Just some examples of houses that would not be approved today. The top picture shows a very blank wall face that would not be approved today. The house on the bottom right I put in just because it's really interesting. But is that a wall or a roof? Mm-hmm. So impacts, implications, there are economic factors. These values are assessed between $500,000 and $700,000. Construction value 2 to 3 times the lot value, as we explained in our report. We all know that rising property values do lead to larger houses, and constraining house size could diminish property value. Social factors, there's an effect on community and neighborhood. It's about change, in particular existing neighborhoods that are established and then undergoing new housing forms. Single-family permit process. These new homes, they are permitted in that there are no bylaw amendments. They have a right to a building permit as long as they meet the building code and the zoning bylaw, so there is no public process involved in it. And I know that several members of the community often ask us, they weren't contacted when the new home was being built on their street, and so we have to explain to them why. One of the things that we are trying to do is, with our good neighbor policies and brochures, to try to reach out in terms of new construction and how it impacts existing development. Next steps, we're looking for council to provide us with direction, and we could report back to staff if required. Questions?
Thank you very much. Start with Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you very much. Before this issue came up, I didn't realize how much I didn't know, and now I'm learning a lot more. It's a complicated and important subject. We're hearing a lot about it. I imagine your department is hearing a lot about it as well. And I think one of the big messages I get from this report is that every little step that we might take further than all the restrictions we have now will have some sort of impact. Perhaps a positive impact in one way, but also a negative impact on the property holder or something like that. So I think presenting a report like this that sort of lays out the trains that we would have to travel if we make any changes is a good one. It's a good starting point. And before I get talk a little more general at the end, remind me to get back for some general comment on that. Is I wanted to there was something in here that just leapt out at me in terms of something I hadn't heard before or seen, and that was the comment about the a lot of the bigger homes are now being they're using manufactured construction materials that are lighter and less expensive for their wood joist systems, but these are, although they don't catch fire any more easily, they burn a lot more quickly and pose a lot of dangers. Now, is this something that's specifically an issue with big homes use this, or is this construction product being used in all the homes, all home construction now?
Mm-hmm. Good question.
And if it's just big homes, I understand why it's here, but if it's being used in all construction, I don't know why it's actually an issue for this report. But anyway, I'd like to hear about that.
Sure, yeah, through the chair. There is no correlation between the types of building materials used on large homes or small homes. Really, it comes down to preference, builder familiarity with products. For example, pre-manufactured truss joists that are manufactured CSA approved, fire tested, they're an approved product. There are advantages and disadvantages of using them, and it comes down to what the builder chooses to use. New homes are actually overall in their design and the building materials they use safer than old homes. In general, every year the products become better. They are more compartmentalized. The type of materials that they use are far superior than they did in the 50s and the 60s, and safer too. So pre-manufactured wood trusses are the norm today. They are perfectly safe. There's no difference between those and hand-framed trusses, for example. Other materials that they swap in or out, there's no correlation between larger homes being more unsafe.
Okay, thank you. That's important to note then. I thought there was a suggestion that maybe they were with this report on page 12 there. I'm glad to hear that's not the case. There was somebody from the wood industry, construction industry, up at the UBCM convention last week, and he's actually at all of our conventions. So I sent him an email over the weekend asking about the subject as well, and he was going to check with his technical people on that. So if I hear anything new, I'll let you guys know as well. So my general feedback on this is that clearly we're getting a lot of people wanting the city to do something here, but I think we have to move very carefully, because for every reaction there's going to be a reaction, and there'll be some unintended consequences as well. I think we've seen that in Port Moody, where they were willing to rush right in, but some of the property owners are saying, hey, I can't build my dream home now, or I'm going to lose a lot of value on my land now. I'm not, and so that's, I think, an issue that we have to look at. So in terms of, and I think in terms of these out of proportion homes, essentially, that are going into areas with one type of home, and then there's some new out of proportion bigger homes being built. I think we do want to listen to the public on this as well, and we want to make sure we get both sides of the story. So I think if we go forward in this, and I think most of my colleagues on council will want to have maybe come up with something on this, that it's imperative, as we say right at the end in your last. So the next steps, actually on page 12 as well. If council directs staff to undertake further review, a proposed public consultation process on this issue will also be included in the report back to council. So yes, absolutely. And I would like to keep that report that would come back as sort of general, and looking at the options as general as possible. I'm not sure that the city's in a position, because we don't really know what the public thinks about this, to sort of say this is what should be done. I wouldn't want to see a staff report saying this is what should be done. I think maybe look at all the different options: status quo, changing some of the different parts, like the footprint or the FAR or something like that, and the different levels there. I think that'd be a really worthwhile discussion to have and to hear what the public thinks about that, and industry as well. We always are very good at touching base with the UDI and home builders and things like that. That'd be very important. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Well, my favorite topic. So there were some things in here that I think we have to take into consideration before we go forward. So I was around here in '92 when we first got the Halbert report in. And again, the houses weren't quite as big as what we have today, but and they didn't take full advantage of the lots because it was in those days it was the Leave It to Beaver days, and you had the white picket fence and the little darling children that never did anything wrong, and everyone had a yard and a dog and 3 cats. But life has changed. But one thing I'm going to take exception to is when you say the return on investment. So if you want a big return on investment in real estate, then go to an investment area. If you want a home for your family, invest in what the best fit is for the neighborhood that you choose. You will always get a return on your investment. I mean, real estate will just go for the market. But just because you have a great big lot and you don't fully build it out, there's more to the square footage. I mean, look at the War of the Roses. Remember that movie? That was really quite fun. But there's more to it. You get, in some neighborhoods you go, and I guess I'll use Shaughnessy in Vancouver. You can go in there and find a big lot with a little dinky bungalow that's getting $2-3 million. You know, so, and it's because of the ambiance of the area and because of what's happening in the area and how close it is to shopping, etc. So I don't always think that as a city we need to worry about the people who are just building the maximum square footage just so that they can make money. If they want to do that, I can find all kinds of places for them to go. I'm interested in building a house for families and neighborhoods. So I'm not necessarily interested in providing rules so that people can just get a good return on investment. And for me, in my city, that's what I'm more interested in doing. Whether it be more modest accommodation or larger accommodation, there's room for everyone, but I certainly don't have to just make it a strictly investment thing. Back in the 80s in the townhouses, I remember when we built them, when that's the first time I ever saw in my real estate career these fancy trusses and that were supposed to be good. But I will tell you a comment on what you've made. I've seen houses that Grandpa built back in the 50s that are still standing and not squeaking, and there's a lot of stuff that's been built since then that is rotting. So I don't necessarily say that everything that's gone on since Grandpa was building houses is worse. I do like Surrey's sliding scale. I think it has some merit. But one of the reasons you have to remember that one of the things that they brought it in, their land is different. They have a lot of flat land. We don't. So when you look at the sliding scale, how it would work in that community, it's different than, I think maybe it's more useful to them than it would be to us, but that's just an aside. Yep. And the other thing I think we have to look at is out in Surrey and Langley and out there, they are getting a lot of houses built that are 12, 14, 20,000 square feet for extended families. And is that what we want in our neighborhood? So that's something too to think of. Do we want, instead of having 5 or 6 in a family and mom and dad and 4 kids, and dogs of course, do we want 3 or 4 families, even though they're all related, and that is that what we want? And if we do, then we really have to rethink our neighborhoods. Because what are we going to do about schools? You know, I remember when my kids were growing up, we had an extended family live next to us, and there was like 9 kids came out of one house, and Parkland School just couldn't accommodate it. So then other neighbors had to take their children and put them into other schools and not the neighborhood school. So if we're going to look at monster houses, I think we have to look at why we're building them. I had one more thing and then I'll be quiet. Oh yeah, instead of California bungalows, they're called split levels. California doesn't build many bungalows because they can't go deep. The good neighbor policy. That was one really good thing that we brought in, and I think that is something that's really important to us, especially because of the difference in our terrain that we have. And that also means a lot. And Port Moody is finding that. There were a few houses in Port Moody that were built, and even though they have, and I think you know the one I'm speaking about, Mr. McIntyre, it conformed to the inch of every bylaw they had, but it was a nightmare in the neighborhood. It just totally destroyed a neighborhood. So I think we have to look after that. The only thing I would attack differently than what you have is building heights. And I think when we go to the public, and I think we need to go to the public, I like the simplicity of your presentation. Thank you for that. But one of the things I think you're going to have to explain is what happens, you said on one of the tops of the pages here about building heights, and it said it has a whole bunch of other problems somehow. Once you start reducing heights, then you exacerbate what you're trying to do on the sides. The things we have done right, and I think other municipalities are looking at us, is we don't allow any blank walls. We've put decoration, or we've broken up the side walls and the back walls when you have a whole bunch of height. And I like that. But I do think I would like to explore ways that we can reduce the height more. And I think I'll be quiet now, because I think I've probably said enough, but I think we're on the right track and we have to tweak, and that's where we are. And I'm looking forward to public consultation. And by that I mean I'd like public to come here, and I'd like to put presentations up, and I'd like to have actual little models. I guess we can give all the gentlemen their Lego sets and they can get busy building little houses and little mountains and things that you do. And it's interesting, now that you can model on here, it would be interesting to show someone a 8,000 square foot house and how different it could look on a flat lot as to a side hill or a top hill. And I think people need to see what it is. You can't just explain it, because it really is complicated. And thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge.
Yes, thank you. You know, I guess one of the things that when I look through and I look at the report, and you know, and a lot of the things and I think it's a good report, and I agree with what you're saying, but the challenge is that I still hear from people and they say, how did this get built? I mean, you know, you ticked off all the boxes. I said, how does this, it doesn't fit with my neighborhood. How did this come to be? And of course, you know, they don't come to us, they'll come to a permit. There's no neighborhood consultation. If it's, you know, it's based on the zoning, it's the land use, and if, you know, if the height is okay and the width's okay and the setbacks are okay and the massing is okay, it gets passed. And I think what the problem is that we have a combination of the three. It's a combination of size, it's a combination of lot coverage, and it's a combination of floor space. And if you max out on, I guess, all of them, you end up with what some people would say is a monster house. And it is design. I've seen some really large homes that fit into the neighborhood and some that don't. But as you said, you know, we don't have the ability to govern design on residential. The other thing is that there's a challenge on timing. And as Councillor Neal alluded to, and I was actually going to make mention of the fact that, you know, that sometimes sitting here I feel like I am part of Newton's law of motion, that, you know, I pass and make, you know, for an action or something we do, there's always a reaction. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face. And I think the challenge, though, here is the timing. You know, we hear from residents who've bought into a neighborhood, or they have an idea, they see how the neighborhood likes, and it's, you know, what the neighborhood looks like, and it's you know, it's close to school, it has green space, they like the houses, they like their neighbors, they buy in, they make an investment in their neighborhood. And then one of their neighbors changes what their goals in life are and decides, well, now it's time for me to sell, and they sell to somebody who has a different vision for that neighborhood. And it really comes down to a timing. Yeah. Eventually, we're all going to sell our homes, whether we like it or not, or if it's out of necessity. And we want that, you know,
we want that peace and quiet and serenity and everything that we bought into when we bought into that neighborhood. And one of the things I hear from people is, oh, there goes my property values. The person next to me has built this giant house or something. Well, it certainly has affected their lifestyle, and that's a real concern for them. But if we were to go and sort of say, well, you can't build anything bigger than such and such, we're actually affecting the value of the property. And so down the road, that can have an impact on them. So in today's stage of the life where they are, where they're raising the family and everything, this is their neighborhood is perfect. But at some point, they're also going to think, what's the value of my land? And so this is the challenge between the compromises, that how do we protect our neighborhoods? How do we protect the quality of life for the people who live there today? But also recognize, as they tell me, this is my biggest investment and the neighborhood's all being ruined, but it also is their biggest investment at the time that they go to sell it. And I completely understand why other communities have wrestled with this, and I understand why that there is no clear fix for it. And I think the challenge is going to be to try to come up with that balance. And I think that, you know, people out in the community, they have to recognize what the pros and cons are of this, or the action versus the reaction. That something that makes complete sense today may come as a problem later. But having said that, I still think that there needs to be a way to somehow regulate so that people can still build a nice home on their property and still find something that will fit in with the character of the neighborhood. Now, that's very subjective. Everybody has a different idea of what they'd like to see in their neighborhood and what the character of a home should be. And that's why our homes don't all look the same, as everybody has a different idea of what their home should be. And, you know, as they say, one thing is one person's counsel. So I think that what I'd like to sort of see is a little bit more work on what we can do, how we can try to curtail some of those, and we know which ones they are. And there's ones that are far worse than the pictures you showed, and I thank you for maybe not spelling them out, but I get emails of pictures, and it starts with a headline, "How did you ever approve this?" And so, and I look at that and sort of say, obviously it fit. One of the things that I hear is, oh, well, they broke the rules. Why weren't the rules enforced? I've heard this a couple of times just in the last month. And they said, oh, well, they got variances. And I said, no, they were able to build this within the existing rules. And if people in the neighborhood are saying that they're breaking the rules, maybe we do have to look at what those rules are. Because if the homes are being built within the rules and people think the rules were broken, that tells me that maybe there is a problem with the rules. But again, we get into that. How constrictive do we become? Because at some point it is going to affect the values on the resale down the road, even could be your own house in 20 years. So I appreciate the dilemma that we're all in over this, and I found it very interesting to look at what some of the other cities have done. I like the sliding scale model, and I think that what we owe it to our residents to at least look at these rules, see what we can tweak further, and I know that we're not going to be able to sort of please everybody on both sides of this argument, but I think we should at least have the discussion and try. Thank you.
Okay. And Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. You know, after serving a notice of motion 3 years ago, this thing finally has come forward. And I guarantee if election was a year away from now, it still wouldn't be here before us. But we know that this is going to become an election issue. These monster houses, no question about it. And the fact is that, you know, I know homes that I hear from neighbors saying there's 2 kitchens in it. There's 6 bedrooms. And it goes on and on and on. And as I said, I served a notice of motion 3 years ago. We should have been on it 3 years ago. But then the mayor said the staff is too busy. Well, yes, she did. I'm sorry, it's on tape. You can listen to the tape, and you'll see, you know, half the time you don't know what you're saying anyway. But however, you know, we're just going to, you know, the problem is that the neighborhood is up in arms. Back in the 80s, you heard an odd one little complaint. It wasn't that bad. And you mentioned the Riverview lands in the 90s. Well, that's when or in the 80s. It got built in the 80s. And when you were building a house there, you knew what was next door, or what was the vision of all the homes around there. So you had no really complaint. But we're talking about these other areas of Coquitlam where people have been there for many, many years. And we're talking about, you know, like one house on Wall Street. Take a look at that monster. Guess what? You have your side street or side yard 6 feet. There ain't no 2 inches between that monster house and the house that was next door's yard. The staircase was right up against his yard. And guess what? After 40 years, they sold. They said, we're sick and tired of looking at a 35-foot wall, and we're not going to live here any longer. These are the things that are happening in this city. I'm not the planner. We're paying you people to be planners. And I would expect something to come forward that's much better than it's come out to us so far. Okay? You know, maybe it's a 35%, you know, coverage, site coverage. Maybe it's height. You have one on Chapman Avenue. Had a stop work order. Matter of fact, Mr. McIntyre himself drove past that house, 2 years ago? Had a stop work order on it. You should have seen it. It was so far out of character it wasn't even funny. Now, you know, do we have to, you know, can they maybe 2 houses on the same lot? That look like the neighborhood? I'm not here. I'm here to represent the taxpayer. I'm a politician. Look, the neighborhoods phone me. They're up in arms. I'm going to see how I can help them. Okay, if I can. Okay? So, you know, to me, whether the guy builds a house that's 7,000 square feet, get $2 million for that house, or build something that's 5,000 square feet and get maybe $1.5 million for it, it's none of my business. It is my business when he ruins the whole neighborhood. It is my business. So, you know, I remember years ago, we had duplexes where there was hundreds of applications of duplexes in the 80s. Guess what? The duplexes were 2 sides side by side with a basement. Guess what? Those basements became 4plexes. They became 4plexes. So, you know, so I said, look, we're going to have no basements or just crawl spaces. And we'll have 1,500 square feet, I believe, was 13 to 1,500 square feet on either side. And it stopped from any duplexes being applied for, because it couldn't become 4plexes. We're scared of lawsuits. We're scared of a whole lot of things. Well, you know something? I'll tell you. It's a wonder that the lawsuits that come at us to where we ruin the neighborhood in this community. I think it's time that this should have been aboard us. We should have had something more than this before us. Far beyond this. And you know, you're asking for us to give you some advice and give you advice, get on with it. That's what I can give you advice on. And cut it to where it should be, to where we have something that we can say, yeah, that's good enough or it isn't good enough. Councillor Reid was correct when she said that in Surrey, Langley, 2 different stories, there might be 6 families living in one house. And they're monster houses, you know. In here, I guarantee you there's 2 and 3 families living in some of these houses. So, you know, is this what Coquitlam should look like? Is this what I want Coquitlam to be like? Do I want to disturb the neighborhood because some guy should make an extra $1 million for his house? Is it my business to see that he makes that extra $1 million? Or is it up to me to see that the neighbors are happy with what they see around them? That is what my business is. So it's up to the planning department. Don't come to me for advice. I'm trying to tell you what's in the community. It's loud and clear. Go up Blue Mountain Road, about a block of Blue Mountain Road. Want to see a monster? There's one about 9,000 square feet. Just, you know, maybe if there was a whole bunch of houses, 9,000 square feet would be different. But it's totally out of character in the area, totally out of character. I got many, many calls on that house. So those are the things. And again, you're the planners. You're supposed to be the brains. You bring me something that I can either approve or reject. But what we've got now is a report just before the election, and the only reason it is here because election is around the corner, and it's going to become a issue with the neighborhoods. And no question about it, it'll become an issue. So, you know, again, I can go on and on and on and on. It just, you know, to the time where it should have been in place now, we should have had something before us. We should have had something to where the neighborhoods are not up in arms. But they're up in arms. In the old parts of Coquitlam, the established parts of Coquitlam, they're up in arms. The other day I got a call, a couple of months ago on Turnbull Drive. You know, take a look at that development. Compared to what's around there, you know, it's an ugly home to begin with. Take a look at it and see. And the neighbors up across the street and next door are phoning me. So that's what's happening. So I think I spoke enough. I don't want to carry on any further, but it's time to get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, and thanks a lot for these two reports, the one on the PowerPoint and the one in our binder, because this is a huge issue, and I think it's important that we do some work on it as quickly as possible, yet still have proper consultation and that sort of thing. A couple of things, you know, the report, more so the one in our binder, to me it showed that it seemed like there was more concern for how this impacts the city and our planning department and our permits and how it affects the builder more than how it really affects the community. And I think, you know, we're here to serve the community, and we really need to keep that in mind. We're not here to make our jobs easier, but we're here to create the best community that we can. And then I don't want to be negative, but I didn't see that in the report like I would hope to. We were concerned about, you know, increasing permit fees for these houses. Well, if it's true that the house values are usually 2 to 3 times the lot value, we're talking $1 to $2 million houses. And if the permit increases by a couple $1,000s, I don't feel sorry for the person building that house, right? They can afford it. It's not an affordable housing situation at all. We talked about, we look at the comparison between our municipality and other municipalities, and you know, we have the highest maximum height limits. We have the largest lot coverage of all the municipalities. Some are tied with us, but you know, in your report, it was mentioned that, you know, these regulations were designed for compatibility for infill, and I feel like maybe we didn't go far enough, because what we're hearing from so many different sources is it's not compatible with the neighborhood, and we really do need to change those things. In terms of some of the points that were brought up, I like the sliding scale for larger lots, especially for flat lots. I think for lots on a slope, maybe we'd have to change that. But I also feel that having a one-size-fits-all zoning for these areas maybe isn't appropriate based on the different types of lots that we have, right? We have a lot of flat lots, but we also have a lot of slope lots. And maybe, you know, once you go beyond a certain slope, maybe we have to have a different zoning because I don't think the sliding scale works as well on a steep lot. In the report, it talks about you know, the potential of changing the maximum height allowed. And Burnaby has a maximum height of 7.6 meters, and we have a maximum height of 11 meters, but it doesn't talk about what the consequences would be. So are you able to explain, you know, what we might be looking at if we changed our maximum height from 11 to, say, 10 or 9.5 or something like that? Mm-hmm. Yes, my question, yeah.
Okay, so one thing you have to ask yourself is, how is Burnaby measuring their height? They may be measuring, so if you're comparing 7.5 or 7.3?
7.6.
6 to 11, we want to make sure that we're comparing exactly the same way to measure. But on the issue of height, one of the studies done in the past was if you were to reduce a height, from example, from 11 meters down to 10, would it make a difference in how big the house is? One of the things that would probably certainly occur is that the designers and builders would build a shallower roof slope and not lose any floor area. That would be their first choice. So you're going to see squatter and flatter homes. Some would indicate that that actually is the reverse effect of what you're really trying to achieve, and that is that usually steeper pitched roofs bring with it other features like dormers and turrets and other things that are more pleasing in terms of design. We all know of neighborhoods where they are squatter, flatter boxes, and I don't think that's where we want to go. So the question is, how far do you go? Do you want to go to try 9 meters? We can look at it. Sooner or later, you're going to get to a point where you'll lose a floor. And then if that is adequate in terms of floor area, we can look at that. Might have a huge impact on the area of total floor area built. So there's that threshold that you're going to reach at some point, which will change the design radically.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I see what you're saying, and I don't know how Burnaby calculates theirs because it's not in the report. So, you know, and I like the idea of articulation on a wall, but you still got the height, right? And for a lot of people, from what I've been hearing, it's more the height than it is the massing of the wall, and maybe it's because we don't allow just the big mass wall anymore either. So the next thing to complain about is the height, but. It just, you know, even the diagrams you showed, I mean, it's a nice, beautiful, nice articulated wall. It still cuts off the sunlight, right? And we talk about lower, squatter, flatter roofs. Well, that's what's in all of these communities now anyways, right? And what we're doing is dramatically changing it to peaked roofs. And so, again, you know, for infill compatibility, I'm just not sure if that's the best way to go, but again, I don't know. I'd love to see how some of these tighter regulations would affect property values, right? Because we don't really know. My sense is it may not affect property values to the extent that some people are afraid of. My other question was when we looked at the changes back in 1992. Like I mentioned, it was all based on infill compatibility, but we didn't, based on what people are saying now, we didn't maybe go far enough. Is there a reason why we didn't push a little harder to deal with the size back then? And then again in 2011 when it was brought up again?
Yeah, I'd have to look at the reports that led up to it, and I suspect the same discussion occurred then that is occurring now. It's a balance. How far do we go? What do we change? So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I just want to mention that I built a house 18 years ago, and it was a rather large house, not a monster house, but it was a rather large house in a developed area. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to do what we could to fit into the area. It ended up being taller than we thought it was going to, and once the trusses were put up, I almost threw up when I came by to look at it. So there was no intention, but at the time we were allowed to do that. If we weren't allowed to do that, but we still wanted to build a large house, we would have gone elsewhere to Westwood Plateau or and I think we need to keep in mind that there are other options, right? And if the property values aren't going to decrease that much, if we have other opportunities for people to build large houses elsewhere, I think we need to do what we can to protect these neighborhoods, and because it really is causing a lot of angst, especially amongst older people, and I don't think it's as fair as it should be for those kind of neighborhoods. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Rasmussen.
Well, thank you very much. Interesting discussion. It's an issue. I think in the staff report, on a couple parts, but on page 3, the study indicates that extensive consultation needs to be done with the public on this. We have people who are upset in the change in their neighborhood, and all change brings different reaction to people. is that what the rest of the neighborhood feels, or is it not what the rest of the neighborhood feels? I think for us, we talk about what we think it should be or might think it should be, but I think we need to be fully consulting with the public, and I think the staff talks about the budget needed and the extra departments that are going to be involved. If the council decides to move on this, you know, department work plans and budgets and staff resources will have to be reallocated, and other departments will have to be involved in this because it's a large project. Because in the end of the day, most people, then we talk about development, are worried about their values of the property. We hear that quite often, quite frequently about that. So when you're reducing what is considered the allowable biddable density on any piece of property, you are going to affect that property value from what it is today to what it will be in the future. That could be $25,000, that could be $100,000. It all depends on what the changes might or might not be. If you've lived in your house for 25 or 30 years, that's not really maybe a big deal to you. If you just bought your house or 5 years or 10 years ago, that's going to be a big issue to you, right? That's going to be a huge issue to you and how that impacts you and your life. So that's going to have a bearing on a lot of people out there. I grew up in South Burnaby. My neighborhood has changed drastically. My street where I live now is about 50% change with larger homes than the, ours is about 1,800 square foot house on that street, 1952 built house. And so all the houses, our parents' house is still there, but all the houses around them are, you know, a story higher and changing. And the other street house probably about 70% change. And so now those houses that were built in the 50s don't fit the character of the neighborhood. They look out of place to what the neighborhood is in that area. I really believe, though, I don't even think that we should be doing this on a broad neighborhood area. I think if we're going to be talking about this, we should be talking about it on a street-by-street consultation area, because it's that important to me about how it affects the people and what are the people's real interests on each and every street. And I think in the report indicates that if you're going to make these changes, you're going to need probably about 70% of the people in that area to agree to it, to the effects that it can have on it. In Burnaby, I've seen some of those older designs with those flat, squat roofs, and it makes for a far uglier looking design. Mind you, the one thing about housing is what some people think is ugly, something is, so it's about taste, and everybody has a different form of taste in it. The reality also is today that all new houses, or every house in Coquitlam now, can have a legal suite. Any new house today is going to be built with a legal suite. It's just a fact of life. And all legal suites are going to be about 1,000 square feet. So if you're building a house and you're going to have 2,000 square feet of livable space for yourself, you're going to have 1,000 square feet, you're probably going to be a minimum size house of 3,000 square feet. Probably going to be a minimum rebuild that you're going to do on a lot. So that's part of the effect. We talked about large homes, and I guess to me, we've never defined. People have talked about, and there's a few of them around, you know, 6,000, 9,000 square foot houses. But what are we talking about? What are we really mentioning about what is a large home? What I found interesting in the report was that most of the larger houses being built in Coquitlam are between 4,500 and 5,000 square feet in these neighborhoods. And I think if we reduced our height, we'd still be building those same houses. So is council's wish to build only 3,000, 4,000 square foot houses? So, I mean, there's a lot of things going on in this report, a lot of comments being made, but nobody's defined in this whole discussion what is a large house, what is too big in these neighborhoods. And the other thing is that if you restrict it too much, then the other quick thing that people have to understand is the possibility of happening in their neighborhood. And as I think another councilor mentioned, he's here and he seemed to support it, is that if you can't build a single-family house, then people would wind up coming in and subdividing the lot into 2 lots. So potentially in the future, that neighborhood would then be double the density than what it was. Do people want that in their neighborhoods? Would people, if you're asking people, that should be presented to them, is your choice to have a larger homes, single families, or double the density? Because remember, whether it's a large home or from a 7,000 to a 3,000, they're all allowed to have a secondary suite, one in them. So every one of those new houses that might be smaller are allowed to have a secondary suite in them also, and increasing the density. Is that what that neighborhood wants? Is that what the people want? It's a complex issue. There's a lot to go into this. There's a lot the community has to understand on what it's affecting the neighborhood. We hear a lot about secondary suites being allowed, the traffic, the parking that increases. Do people prefer that over just a larger home, single family? I do know that there's issues about secondary suites, and I raised this in this council about our enforcement of secondary suites, and we take a more passive attitude towards. I've asked us to, but it's a low priority, it's a C priority for staff to look at and be more proactive on secondary suites in this issue. To say that a large house will have 2 suites, I know houses that are in the 3.5, 3,000 or whatever that have been found to have 2 suites in them. So it doesn't matter in the size, getting suites into them. So there's a lot that goes into this report. There's a lot to be considered. But I do think that the most important thing is we get out to the community, and if we're going to do this, that we fully consult and really get people to understand what are the consequences of the changes that we're talking about. Elections up, some people think, or maybe this is raised as an election issue by some people to create an issue. Who cares? I think this is an issue that's been brought up. We've heard from some people complaining about it. Is that the majority of the people in the community? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Until we fully go out and consult on the public, and that's what we should always do when we promote any change, is go out and consult. And that's my biggest thing. Let's find out what the people and all the people really have to say, just not some people that are complaining and aren't the majority. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zerillo.
You must be tired of standing there now. Thank you for this informative report, and thank you for pointing out that there are already opportunities to own very large houses in Coquitlam. There are neighborhoods in Coquitlam that were built this way. That was the way they were built, and the people that moved in there moved in because they wanted to be in a large home. And I think in the interest of housing choices, we need to maintain areas for those that are interested in smaller homes with larger yards. I think we need to maintain a portion of Coquitlam that offers this lifestyle choice, because it is about lifestyle choice. Regardless of return on investment, and regardless of those type of things, this is about lifestyle choice. People buy a home to live in it. Yes, we can speculate, we might move in 10, 15, 20 years, but for most people, it's about how they want to live. So as a city, I believe we need to respect the unique characteristics of neighborhoods, and we have pockets in Coquitlam where the neighborhood should stay smaller homes, larger yards. What we currently have is not working for some areas of South Coquitlam, and that's what we need to address, and we need to address it quickly, because according to the residents I've been speaking to, and I've been doing door knocking for the last 10 months, I basically haven't stopped since the by-election, they're not happy. They're not happy with the lot coverage. So this would be my comment, that 45% lot coverage, it's too big. So this is what I'm hearing. And the other thing is, I've noticed a remarked increase in tear-downs since I door knocked for the by-election. Over the last 6 weeks, I have noticed streets where 2, 3 houses are down, and it's negatively impacting the lifestyle of the people that live on that street. And I just want to share that with staff, because as Councillor Sikora said, I mean, staff is the ones that need to plan, and we as councillors are the ones that can give you that information. So those are the 2 points. This 45%, it's not working for these old neighborhoods in Coquitlam, and this idea of having 2 or 3 houses that are totally tear down is very difficult to live with, and I think it's added by the construction fatigue around the streets right now and the Evergreen Line and that sort of thing. So that's what I would share with staff. And thank you so much for the report.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge.
So I had a couple of questions. I appreciate the dialogue and what we've had. And a couple of questions come to mind is, I talked earlier about, people have different views. I think it was one of the councillors raised the question, what is large? And I think, to the person building the house, they think it's fine. To the person next door, it is too large. And I think a lot of this is about protecting neighborhoods. It's about livability, not just maximizing size, because as Councillor Zerillo said, there is places in the city where you can build large homes. We don't hear about this problem on Westwood Plateau. We don't hear about this problem on Burke Mountain, because people move on into those neighborhoods with an expectation of what that neighborhood looks like. The biggest problem we have right now is we have neighborhoods that are in transition, and we have to respect the wishes of the people who live there. Sometimes people bought there because I like this neighborhood, I like this look, this home is big enough for me, and then a neighbor who has different ideas changes the look of that neighborhood. And it's interesting because, as I said earlier, people will come, I've heard people say, how did they build this? They broke the rules. And I don't think they broke the rules. I think the rules themselves are broken. So I just would like maybe for a second hear what your thoughts are. I mean, you've laid some of it out. You've laid the reasons why. You know, and I get, you know, the different, you know, we have the boxes, they get ticked off. But I look around the city and I see some houses there and I just shake my head and so I said, how did this get built? And is it just because, is it the FSR? Is that the problem? Is it height? Is it a combination of the three things? I mean, I think your earlier explanation is, well, we can lower the roofs, but then we get houses we don't like. So what is it? I'll ask that question. I know I just asked the question that's on everybody's mind. What went wrong? And you know, how are we going to fix it?
Would you like an answer now?
Please. I'd like the whole thing solved this afternoon, but I know that this is a very complicated issue. But what I've heard mostly, and including when I door knocked 3 years ago, how did this happen?
Okay. I think there's one thing that I personally have seen with a lot of the applications, and you know, every now and then I pull them out just out of curiosity and have a look at what's going through the process. Recently I just went through our computer system and did a sample of about 20 homes that were approved in 2014, just to get a feel what's being built out there. You know, it's interesting. Now remember, this includes the square footage of the basement. Okay, and remember, some of the FSRs and other municipalities don't include that. So, but what we're seeing is a range from 0.2 in terms of square footage, FSR, up to 0.8. That's the range that we're seeing in 20 applications in the last year. Interestingly enough, why the range? Because on some really large properties, some people are choosing to build very modest homes. They're, you know, 4,000 square foot. Is that modest? I think in today's world, I mean, we all remember, you know, growing up in homes where 2 or 3 of the kids were in bunk beds. We had a basement that was only used to house the furnace and store coal and on and on. And houses were very modest and small, and we lived outdoors. Today that doesn't happen. We have entertainment rooms, we have nanny rooms, we have recreation rooms, we have second kitchen with a bar fridge downstairs, we have secondary suites that are built in. And these homes today are they provide us with we expect different things from today's house than we did 30, 40, 50, 80 years ago. On the other hand, some of the homes that are coming in are extraordinarily large on modest lots, 8,000 square foot lot with a 6,000, 7,000 square foot home. Why? Because it could be a custom built home that a contractor's bought. He's bought the home, he's knocked it down, he's building a home to sell to whomever is willing to buy. And he's probably working, you know, with real estate agents because they have prospective buyers. So there's a real different reason why people are building different homes. And obviously some are looking at the community saying, you know, this is my dream. I wanted to live in this neighborhood, and I'm just going to build a home for my family. You know, as Councillor Reid mentioned earlier, that's the reason why people built homes in the 50s and 60s. It's what they could afford, and that's all they needed for their home, their family. Today, it's people are building homes for all different reasons. And what is a big house? It's a good question. As Councillor Asmundson brought up a good point, your secondary suite's going to be close to 1,000 square feet. So then you subtract that from your overall building size. What is it? How much space do you need in a home to live in? Is it 2,000 square feet? Is it 3? So, you know, you're looking at a 4,000 square foot home. Extended family, big issue today. We got lots of people who want to age in place. They're building homes to bring their parents in to live with them. And they don't want to put their parents in the secondary suite. They want their parents to live with them on the main floor and rent the suite out. So it's it's very, very varied as to what's driving these larger homes. People feel that that's what they need to meet their needs.
But there are lots in other places in Coquitlam. Is this that these lots are cheaper? Is it because the older lots are bigger? I mean, as I said earlier, the problem tends to be is it's not in this neighborhood. It's not, some of these homes would look perfectly fine in a different neighborhood, but it becomes the infill becomes the issue. Yeah. And we had a zoning application a few months ago, and where a whole community came together and said, this isn't right for our street. And we had this sort of discussion about, okay, well, if you don't want this type of development on your street and you all buy into it, this does limit the future potential for your properties. But if living for today is the most important thing for you and raising your families today, can we then go in and say, okay, on this street, in this area, we're not going to allow homes that exceed this much? Can we actually, and this may be a question more for Mr. McIntyre, is can we go in and say spot zoning? If a majority of the community says, you know what, this isn't right for our neighborhood, can we make that change so that people buying in know that 3 years after they make the investment in their home, that the next door neighbor isn't going to go and change the look of the neighborhood after they've made that investment?
Jim, maybe if I could, that would be an option. To get back to your earlier question, Councillor Hodge, about what can we do? This report did a scan. It gave some background information. We have some ideas in mind. We've been thinking about this and looking at the issue for a while. And if Council wishes, we can report back on those. But in that report back, we'll make sure we have the comparables. Because it's not fair to look at a table and it says 7.5 in New Westminster or Burnaby and it says 11 in Coquitlam. There needs to be, we need to equalize the yardsticks, and we will do that. Secondly, around the potential or anticipated property value impact, we have done some analysis on that. If Council wants to see that information, we can bring that forward as well. I think that's quite germane to this discussion. In terms of what we can do, I think there's basically two tracks that I would see. We could come back and we have some ideas. We don't think the zoning bylaw is perfect in its current form. It never is. There are some areas that, and certainly the feedback today, we've got some counsel around the specific areas of issue. We can look at that. We can look at how they've been dealt with in other communities. We can have those comparables. And one option could be to look at modifying or refining the RS1 zones. But through that process, we would certainly urge extensive public consultation, neighborhood, broader public, and interest groups. The other approach, and kind of picking up on your comment about what we heard at a recent rezoning application, and we came across this in our scan of other municipalities, is Burnaby did this, New Westminster did this, the District of North Vancouver. They came up with neighborhood-specific zoning. It's certainly an avenue that we can explore at Council's direction. It's an extensive operation. It consumes a lot of staff time and neighborhood consultation, but that is an option. And in the end, that may be what would be viewed by those residents in those established neighborhoods as the solution to their minds. I think if we look at reviewing, refining the current RS1 zones, it may not go quite far enough for those concerns. So in that case, a neighborhood-specific solution may be the best option.
And my final comment is one of the things I've heard is that some people have said, rather than having this big giant house here that only maybe 2% of the general public is ever going to be able to afford to buy, would we be better to put 2 small houses there? Can we look at, and sometimes they're 2 feet short of being able to subdivide, and you might in the end have smaller mass, have view corridors between the houses, and instead of having one big house that very few people can afford to buy, and then maybe they have to put a rental suite in the basement to afford to buy it, are we better off creating 2 affordable houses? And in some cases, maybe that's the better option.
Your Worship, fair enough, and that's a good fundamental question, and it's something we can look at if we come back with a proposed public consultation process. Let's work that option in there. So that's one thing we heard. Council may recall there was a member of the public that came forward, a resident that came forward earlier in the year about this with some ideas. Staff then met with him, and that's basically was one of his suggestions to us, is to look at that option for allowing for these large lots to subdivide to, in the end, have smaller houses on them, but more houses, and provide that housing choice, that lifestyle choice for residents.
It won't work everybody, but there are some on corner lots and things that maybe 2 smaller homes would look better than 1 giant home. The other question I had, just my final one, is that one of the things I often hear is that people go in, they redevelop their property, they tear the house down. It's not a subdividing, it's not a subdivision permit, so they don't have to contribute anything to the community in terms of DCCs, or there's no contribution to the community. And I hear from the neighborhood saying, well, okay, we've put up with all of this construction, we've put up with everything, this is done, but where's the contribution to the community? And I'm thinking in terms of sidewalks and curbs. And you go through some of the older neighborhoods of Coquitlam, if it's a subdivision or something, you get a section of curb. We know that we've got a lot of those neighborhoods that don't have curbs and sidewalks. What are the options for that when somebody takes down a house and they do a whole new build and they put this kind of money into a house? Can they put something, is there a mechanism where they can put something into the community, even if it's just curbs and sidewalks, and getting started to put in some of the missing infrastructure?
Mm-hmm. Through the chair, again, that's a really perceptive question. It's something the city's wrestled with in the past. I won't go into great length, but there was a time when the city had a system of taking cash in lieu for frontage services, and ultimately that was legally challenged, and we had to back away from that.
It wasn't done on redevelopment. It was done in certain areas where there was subdividing. But I'm just thinking, if we're going to start to see older parts of Coquitlam, where we're going to see over the next 10 years all of these homes, finishing their life, is this an opportunity that we go in and we start sort of fixing up that neighborhood by getting the people who are maximizing some of the properties, homes, to start contributing back to that neighborhood in terms of curbs and some of those amenities that you would in a new subdivision?
A great question. Certainly through the subdivision process we try to address that, but even that has its unique challenges, because you might have a section of curb and gutter and sidewalk sitting there perched up on a raised piece, between lots that sit there in their original state for many years to come. But again, let me commit to, in report back to council, we'll have some discussion around that. There are some provisions in the subdivision development servicing bylaw about that. There's a city's established approach right now, so we can lay that out for council's information.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll try to be really quick. 11-meter roof height. We have, but there's actually 2 roof height limits. 2 height limits depending on the style of the roof. Across the other municipalities that we looked at, is that common? Or are many of them simply, this is the height and I don't care what your roof looks like?
Yeah, through the chair, it really varies. Some municipalities adopt that style of breaking out what's a low slope roof versus a steep slope. Others don't. Others just average the midpoint of the roof slope and just take it from that point. So it's really varied. I would presume, just scanning the neighborhoods, it's about 50-50.
So in some cases, it's like some of the other things we do, they're not truly comparable on our table because they're measured in different ways.
That's right.
So where do we measure to, the peak? Or?
We measure to the absolute highest point of the roof system. So if you put a turret with a steeple on it, well, actually the steeple is exempt, but to the
cell tower on top of
the cell tower, we measure to the highest point of that roof.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's, I guess I'm a little focused on that because that seems to me to be for me, that's the most defining characteristic of what is a monster home. The answer to everybody's question, though, but what is a monster home, is it, to some degree, it depends on how close it is to my house.
Yeah.
And I tend to think 11 meters is too much. But we can't deal with pieces in isolation. But there's no question that it's a real issue. We keep hearing about it. You've done a whole lot of work about it. But it hasn't stopped people from saying, what's going on? How did this happen? Where did it go? I agree, articulating a big, long wall makes it a little more attractive, but it's still a great big wall up beside my house. And articulating the fronts, everything looks kind of jazzier and certainly costs more to build, but it's still a monster home. And so I think we still need to do more. The most significant idea, and the one that's most appropriate that I read in here, is the idea of neighborhood petitions. And what's a neighborhood is determined by the neighborhood. In some cases it's a street or a cul-de-sac, and in some cases it's several streets, depends on the topography, which we've got some of everything. But we really need to formalize a process where one or two people in a street can go out and knock on their neighbors' doors, and if they can summon enough interest, they can come to City Hall and get a bunch of work out of the planning department that'll eventually come to council and may maintain their neighborhood, or give them all the opportunity to build monster homes, because that's what everybody wants to do. It depends on what they all want to do, or the majority of them want to do. Thank you.
Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll be brief, but you've heard 6 council members saying they got a problem what we have in our community now. So that should give you a fairly clear direction of what is it that we want done. Okay, when you're talking about extended families, you're correct. The fact is that the Asian people bring their parents in and they're living in the same home, extended family. Doesn't mean to say that somehow the house has to be 6,000 or 7,000 square feet or 9,000 square feet. It's more an extended family. For instance, I've got many friends that are Asian, and I'll tell you, one family lives, a matter of fact, 2 families side by side on Commercial and 41st and Victoria on Commercial. Guess what? They have their extended family with them. What size are the houses? 4,000 square feet at the most, maybe 3,500, maybe 3,000, but no more than that. You know? And there's extended family. So, you know, we can talk about extended families. Maybe there's some extended families that are renting from Simon Fraser University and other places. That's also might be extended families. That's why these big houses are being built. So, you know, to me, it's got to stop. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, I haven't had an opportunity to say anything yet. This is an issue that has gone back many years. It goes back many years in every community that has dealt with it. I was actually in the consultation process in 1992 when it was last addressed in a major way, although we're tweaking done in the 4 years or 6 years following that. At the time, I had arguments with Mr. Hulbert and with the process, because I didn't think it was going to, it didn't, obviously, and didn't limit the size of houses, the bulk of houses. And actually, ultimately, that's the main issue is, and I think it was Councillor Nicholson just said that the main issue is that peak. It might, for you, that's fine. I think the main issue is bulk. And we've always had that issue of the bulk of it. It doesn't matter whether you include basements or not. My goodness, basements, I've never heard anyone complain. The house next door has too big a basement, unless they're complaining about the potential for suites. That's a different issue entirely. But as far as the size of the home goes, the above-grade bulk is a challenge. And the bulk is affected by such things. It's less affected, actually, by FSR limits. FSR is an ineffective measure because you can have ceiling heights of 10 foot or 11 foot that affect the bulk. You can use a bigger joists to have longer clear spans, and that affects the bulk, particularly with some of the manufactured joists. And of course, you can have a flat roof. The flat roof becomes a real problematic thing, so lowering the 11 meters down to something else creates challenges, and that it encourages the flat roof, which essentially raises up the potential for a higher face from the street. A great many homes, as you drive by, you can compare it to the elevation, the building elevation that appeared at, say, a building permit or at a development permit in some instances. You don't even see the roof as you drive by, but you see it as a massive element on the plans because of the way perspective works. And so the sloped roofs are less of a challenge. They're actually, they add to the potential for a better building design. And I've seen more complaints over a large home, perhaps even the same square footage, that has a flat roof for a number of reasons, than a large home, the same square footage with a sloped roof. So I'd like to see us, you know, I look at the examination of the way we might measure building height. I'd like to see us change that. I don't know whether it's the four corners, whether it's the interior ceiling, that sort of thing. I know that in 200 years ago in France, they changed the way they measure roofs, and a whole bunch of unintended consequences came up, and we call it mansard now. I sat for a number of years in Vancouver on the RS1S advisory committee, and the first year and a half was just learning the name of the committee, and they were actually doing a street-by-street review. That's how fine-tuned Vancouver ended up trying to get with its building regulations to try to make it so that new homes would fit in better to the, and that was largely because the same issue. They were tearing down an 880 square foot NHA approved house from the 60s or 50s and replacing it with something that was different and not necessarily large from the point of view of some of the things you might see in Surrey or even in parts of Coquitlam, but they were different. They were out of character, and I think that's that out of character stuff that is one of the challenges. It's the larger of the challenges, I suspect. How do we make whatever we're building there fit in the neighborhood? You look at Councillor Wilson's home, I think it fits in the neighborhood. I don't think of it as big. I don't think of it as out of character with the neighborhood. And that's the, you know, and there are some neighborhoods that are brand new and they're all big homes, and there's some neighborhoods that are 50 years old and they're all 1.5 story cathedral entry sometimes, but they're modest homes and they're being replaced now with much larger homes that don't fit into the neighborhood. FSR won't work essentially on large lots, so you'll end up with Ranch Park having not reaching the FSR challenge because you've got a massive lot, perhaps a sloping lot, and the problem is an entirely different one. On Danzy and Charlin, the problem again is entirely different because largely it's the large houses on the downward slope that block views. It's large houses on the upward slope that look bigger because the downward wall is necessarily bigger than the uphill wall. And as for I'm glad this report is before us. I know the amount of work that's going to go into coming up with good regulations, because this is we can't do a knee-jerk here. We can't, you know, it didn't get solved in 1992. It didn't get solved in 1996. It's not going to get solved by us instantly here. I think we're going to have to make sure that we talk to the residents of Coquitlam. They're the ones who are going to have to decide whether they want us to regulate some of these issues, because some of them I suspect we're going to hear some pushback from residents who don't want us to tell them what kinds of materials they use or whatever. I'm going to use an example, and I hesitate to use it, but there is a house on Gatonsbury, about Summit, that is, I don't know how big it is. I don't even think that's the part that would catch anyone's eye. It's the fact that it has a very ornate fence, a steel fence, wrought iron fence. It's got a very ornate, it's a completely different style of house. It's a very ornate style of house. And we hear complaints about that, where we have just a different view of what constitutes a nice looking house. And those things we can't regulate. Those things, it's not within our capacity and the Local Government Act to regulate what the house looks like. We can do that at development permit when something is subject to a development permit, but RS1 isn't. So in the end, the same issues that we wrestled with in 1992, and I want us to be more successful this time. As for the length of time this process has taken, I want to make sure that we all understand that every year, several times a year, Council reaffirmed the priority list for the things that we're asking staff to do. The Planning Department, we asked them to do a few things. During that period, we asked them to do the Partington Creek neighborhood plan, the Hazel Harper which are still working on the city center. There was actually a council member at the time that criticized staff because it was going to take 2 years to get into the Hazel Harper plan, into the city center plan because of, and it came up because of a request to fast track that particular plan. Well, we can't just fast track that plan without putting aside the Coquitlam plan and the Lower Lougheed plan and the Millardville plan and the Fraser Mills and the transit-oriented development and the Austin Heights and the housing choices and the affordable housing strategy, all of which we were asking staff to review. We were asking staff to review the parking. Yeah, that's a planning staff function. And we can't, when we set priorities, we have to keep in mind that staff have to do the things we've given them as urgent. This one's got to be done urgently. I wish this one was had been a higher priority, but unfortunately, it didn't move along as quickly as all of us would have hoped, I suspect. We have an issue out there. Where the homes, some of the homes are not in keeping with the character of the neighborhood they're built in. They're not respecting that character. Some of the builders out there don't respect the neighborhoods they build in. And that's another issue, where they start their equipment too early, they throw their coffee cups on the ground, they spill materials onto the sidewalk, they close the street with no regard for the neighborhood, and kind of it's the seeking forgiveness rather than permission. There are some builders out there that I want us to push hard on respecting the neighborhood that they're building in, both in the design of their buildings, but also in the way they treat the neighborhood during construction. And that's, for me, another significant issue. So I'm pleased with the report. We're getting there. I note that, for example, and one of my last comment, this was back in 1992, and I look at the bottom of page 3. Council concluded as a result of this study that the focus should be on encouraging better building design rather than reducing the maximum permitted density on a lot. And I remember that debate because today, for example, we're saying, we could build a 9,000 square foot house on some of these lots. Well, it could have been regulated, but we opted not to. We opted not to back then. And maybe we will change our perspective today, but I'm not second guessing where that proposal is going to go. I have been involved in these processes in a number of communities. None of them made it perfectly. None of them ended up with a perfect regulation, but I think we can strive for a regulation that's better than the one we have now. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry I didn't have a whole lot of questions for you.
That's good. No worries. It's okay. Actually, it's okay.
Okay.
Right? Thank you.
We've already moved a motion to receive. It's already been passed.
Which lets us move quickly into report number 4. Report number 4 concerns the solid waste rollout update, and the report is before you for information.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Congratulations to residents for a 40% shift from organics, or from garbage to organics.
The next report.
Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. On the solid waste, I've got a lot of calls from 1500 block, 1600 block, and the area of Charland, Delane. They're having great problems with getting collection in there. And I'm wondering how we're going to handle that.
Is anyone aware of the 1600 block of Charland?
They used to have their solid waste collected from the lanes, and there's got a problem there, and the people have great problems with what is expected for them to do.
Mr. Goosey.
Your Worship, there are a number of places where the contractor is working with staff to look at options for that. It comes down to safety in some cases. If the lane is straight and the trucks can back into it without incurring a safety issue, it can be resolved in their satisfaction. The trucks only collect from one side, and that's made it difficult for some of the narrower, older lanes in the community. But
I don't know the details on Charlotte, but I know that it is being looked into.
Yeah, I understand all that, but to me, I'm wondering how we went out to bid that's so different than what we used to provide for our residents. I mean, we're now, you know, that's a wonder that the garbage collector that's got the contract didn't drive the city and look at these lanes, or we didn't ask them to drive and take a tour of these lanes, or what are they going to be faced with. Those are the problems that I have. When we go out for a contract, looks good on our desk, we'll sell it. And it's not the way it should be. The fact is, you know, our residents are paying very, very high taxes. They demand a little better service than what they're getting. And secondly, while I'm at it, you've got here that, you know, collection on garden waste, you know, in November and April, or whatever it is, okay? You know, what happens in a year where where there's years where we cut our grass in January and February, the weather's such to where there's a lot of garden waste at all times. For instance, I've got a lot of people phoning me saying, I had to haul 6 bags of garden waste from my yard because they wouldn't pick it up. They can't pick it up because we don't have the containers. So I took it down to the garbage dump. It cost me $20.
Can you
now, you know, what kind of service is that?
Can you tell them how they can save money with another bin?
Well, I know they can get more containers. Yeah.
Well, that'll save them money, actually. I'm just going to, you pose the question.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Worship. That's correct. Residents can opt to have a larger container, green can container, or they can purchase extra containers. There's no limit on that, and there's no extra charge for collection from extra green waste containers. From the statistics that we have on green waste generation, though, the volumes don't start to pick up until March and April. We find over the winter time, from December through to the end of February, it's quite low.
And how are we handling handicapped people?
There's, Your Worship, what we have offered is generally, the City of Coquitlam offers smaller size containers, 120-liter containers that are more easily managed by people with handicap. And that's the best way that we have. Other cities don't have a range of sizes, and so they've had to come up with other alternatives.
So see what happens again. We went to a bed that we didn't consider, you know, handicapped people. I'm talking about really, really handicapped people that can't look at this small container. They can't handle it.
How did they get
handle small containers?
How did they get their garbage out before?
How did they do? You know, very simple. The guy has got a little brown bag that he picks out on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. That's all he has. Since then, he's passed away. You know, but he phoned me about 5 or 6 times. He says, when are they going to get on looking after the handicapped people? And matter of fact, I phoned Mr. Sablin, and the word was, we never thought about it.
Well, I know we had long discussions about this during the debates over the program, and of course we all voted for it.
Yes,
Mr. Kusi.
So what I'm saying, the fact is that, you know what, went out for a bid. There's many, many things we as a city overlooked and didn't give it time to see. We took the bid that looked very good, and yeah, it's saving the taxpayers money, but is it really worth the money that we're saving and the service that we're getting? I don't think so. When I look at the amount of calls you're getting and we're getting and everything else and the complaints that I'm getting, it just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. The bid went out, you know, a year ago or so, and should have been probably looked at a little more carefully and maybe talk to the people that are bidding, that they realize the makeup of Coquitlam, the lanes, and many, many other things. Some of our lanes are narrow, and therefore they cannot pick it up in those lanes and that type of deal. But those should have been studied, and the people that bid on it should have been warned about it, but they weren't. So whatever it is, too late now. We've signed a contract, but these are the problems that we're having. And on Charlotte Street, I know I'll get a call tomorrow morning saying, what have you resolved on it? What have I resolved? Nothing. They will not go up and down the lane. So Anyways, I'm not going to dwell on that anymore,
Okay.
Mayor.
Councillor Zerillo.
I just wanted to ask a few questions to staff and just to share that I'm absolutely supportive of the move to the automated garbage. I never like to see those big garbage cans being picked up. Sometimes they're well over 50 pounds with grass clippings, so I'm very happy about that and absolutely supportive of the idea of making residents more aware about the amount of garbage they're making, and I think this move to every 2 weeks is working and having people move their organic waste, so thank you for that. A couple of things have come up by the community. I know many of them have been heard, but I just wanted to ask a few questions here. The first one is about the plastic overwrap. So I've had quite a few residents say to me that they used to put their plastic overwrap in, and what can they do with it now? And so I visited the MMBC site because I thought, well, shouldn't this be part of MMBC? They're supposed to be the stewards of the packaging that they create. And I noticed that right on their website, it says they don't pick up the plastic overwrap. So I'm wondering if, as a city, we can make a request, or how can we reach out to them and let them know that we expect them to take stewardship for all of the packaging that they produce, not just the ones that they feel like picking up.
Your Worship, certainly staff can make that request. It is a provincial program that the province has authorized the stewardship plan. The plastic overwrap isn't picked up at the curbside because of wind-blown issues and things like that, but it is some types, plastic bags, film plastic is what they call it, is accepted at the OnCorp depots in Coquitlam and other recycling locations. But there is a problem with contamination of some of the plastic overwrap, and the weight of it and the amount of it was not considered great, I suppose, because MMBC did expand the number of and types of plastic that they do accept at curbside. In the past, some types of plastic may have been picked up under the city's old program, but in actual fact, it wasn't recycled. It was the city was paying a penalty when the processor had to segregate it from the rest of the recyclable plastics. So in effect, it wasn't recycled before, but it may not have been turned back to the residents at the curb.
Thank you very much. Well, I was surprised on the MMBC site that there's certain things that they wouldn't take, and it would be great if we could put it back in their hands, or at least let them know that our residents are asking and talking about it. The second one was lanes. I wasn't here on council when this came forward, but I've heard from other council members here that the idea that we couldn't get pickup in certain lanes, they say they didn't know that we hadn't been told that when we made the decision. So, I mean, I don't know what the fix is for that, but I just want to let staff know that there is a lot of people that aren't happy about it. I know on my own street, I came home one day to a letter in my mailbox. We're putting together a petition about wanting pickup on the lane. I back onto Laurentian, and I guess they're not getting lane pickup. So there are a lot of people that aren't happy about it. Don't know what the fix is, but I wanted to share it. No clips on the garbage. I know you've heard this. No clips on the actual garbage cans. Are we planning, because we're going to need to replenish, are we planning to go clips for the replenishment of the actual garbage cans?
Your Worship, we do offer the option to residents to have clips applied at their cost. There was consideration of having the wildlife-resistant clips on both the garbage and the organics. The decision was made to go with organics only to try and create a strong incentive to move food scraps and organic material into the organic cans because they would have the clips on it. The other thing was cost. It adds about 60% more cost to the containers. And in addition, not every residential area has a lot of wildlife issues, and so it was felt that it probably wasn't necessary for a large part of the municipality to put clips on the garbage cans. But it certainly could be done because they're the same design as the green cans, but there would be an added expense.
Okay, I think maybe we need to bring that maybe at another time then, because I think the idea of doing clips, I mean, the two that I've heard about are diapers and sanitary products. Obviously, they cannot go in the bio, and we all know if we camp that those are things that even as you enter national parks, they tell you be careful about these sort of things. So whether it's to do it in a certain area with clips, but I would like to have another discussion to staff about the clips for actual garbage cans. The last question is just about, oh, actually, no, two more. Dillon Consulting is operating the call center. Was that originally budgeted that it would go out to third-party call center?
Your Worship, yes, it was. It was intended, it was anticipated there would be a high call volume that would exceed regular staffing resources.
So will they, how long will they stay with us, this third-party operating call center?
Your Worship, we're monitoring on a week-by-week basis. The call volumes declined quite a bit by the end of August, but then they spiked up because we had allowed people to request cart size exchanges when they first had to make a decision on the carts, and some people did, some people didn't. We told folks that if they to try out the carts for a couple of months, and if they really felt that they should have a larger or smaller size, that they could request a change. So that's most of the call volumes that we're seeing now at Dillon. Interestingly, some people are asking to go back to the 240 liter, which was the size we'd recommended in the first place. They had opted for a different size cart, and now they want to go to the standard size.
Okay. And then, so then lastly, it was just about costs, because I know, I note there's some points here that there was some changes to the route collections, and I know there's been some things that we've had to sort out over the course of the rollout. Has there been an elevated cost? Like, are we still within the budget for everything, or have we taken on some extra costs that we didn't anticipate initially?
Yes, Your Worship, we're still within budget. The advantage to having separate organics collection trucks as opposed to the previous contract is that there can be more tailoring of the organics routing. They can start in a different place, and that's what they've been doing, particularly in the Monday zone where there's more bear sightings along corridors, along ravine corridors. And so some of the collection routes are starting earlier where there's been a history of more bear sightings.
And just that we're in budget was good news, because I know that the staff, and I'd like to thank them, have responded to individual requests over the rollout, and I very much appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also wanted to say that I absolutely am 100% supportive of the conversion, and I thank Councillor Zerlo for that comment as well. This was something that Council opted to do, not for the cost savings, but for a range of reasons. And I'll tell you, I was just up at UBCM, and I remember going to previous UBCMs as we were debating the automated, the possibility of automated. And we heard from municipality after municipality, everyone that I spoke to actually, that I asked the question about the clips. I said, whatever you do, don't put clips on the garbage cans, because you won't be able to divert. There won't be that incentive for people to actually divert. There's a house on Austin actually. I noticed that they've got their green cart out near their driveway, near the entrance of the driveway, next to their garbage can, and the green can still has the kitchen catcher attached to it, because clearly that's a household that doesn't use green. Clearly that's a household that doesn't divert their organics, and I want to see us, continue to encourage. This is a remarkable number. The number in the report here. The comparing numbers that I've heard from other municipalities was that they were able to get 20% or something like that, but they get almost 40% diversion of that one element, that organics diversion, will put us in good stead as we head to the end of the year when Metro Vancouver actually bans those organics. So I'm pleased with that. On the clips with the garbage, though, there was a resident that raised the issue, why don't we have clips on garbage on social media, and said he's devised a bungee cord thing to keep the bears out of his garbage. His neighbor has since sent us the video of how well it worked, because the bear had pulled out everything from the garbage because he still was putting food in the garbage can. So and perhaps we have to make it available to some. I would hope, though, that would be very few, that in the end that we're going to continue to use garbage. I will speak for us continuing to use clips on the organics cart and not on the garbage cart. and with any hope, we'll be able to get even a greater diversion of those organics out of the landfill and out of the production of methane gas in our landfill, assuming we manage to convince people not to go to an incinerator. Okay, Councillor Hodge.
Okay, so I was one of the people that, when Councillor Zarrillo mentioned that, this was brought forward, and I supported automated collection. I thought it was going to be good. I thought it was going to improve diversion. I thought that residents might have some problems adjusting to what goes in what cans. I thought some residents would have some problems figuring out, getting used to the every second week on the solid waste part. So I thought, you know what, those are things that, through education we can do. And I'm really happy that the diversion numbers are good and residents are doing their part. But I think that we have let down a significant number of residents in this city. And I feel I've let them down because when I made this decision, I had no idea how many residents were going to lose their lane pickup. And this is a big deal for a lot of our seniors and a lot of people in residences, particularly on the South Slope. I had an opportunity to visit with somebody who invited me to their place, and they live in the 900 block of Rochester. And they took me around, and Stewart, Edgar, these are all streets in South Coquitlam that have lanes, and they're no longer getting their lane pickup. And he introduced me to a lady who's 90 years old, and she was trying to show me how she tries to get her garbage can up three steps in her front yard to get it up to the curb. What he also pointed out to me is that now people are starting to leave their garbage cans in their front yards because it's too much work to take them around to the back. He showed me people are now putting their garbage cans on their front porches. Some people aren't even bringing their garbage cans in. They're just now taking the garbage out and putting it onto the curb and leaving them there. So this is not working in some of our neighborhoods. I don't know if the lanes are too narrow. I thought all of our lanes are. Do we have maybe we're in an old neighborhoods. Maybe there were different specs for lanes, but in some of these lanes, there's trees encroaching. In one place I looked, looks like the fence comes out into the lane. I don't know if that's an old property line or something. But if we've got problems in the lanes, I think we have to fix the lanes. And I get that the trucks can only pick up from one side and they don't want to go down a lane twice. I think the logical solution is to have everybody put the garbage on one side of the lane so the truck can go in and out and just make one pass. People would rather put the garbage on the other side of the lane than to haul it through their backyard, around their house, and up three sets of steps to get it up to the curb. So I think it's working in a lot of neighborhoods, but there's a lot of neighborhoods this isn't working. And I think we're seeing good diversion rates. That's going to save us some money. But there are places in this city that this garbage collection is not working for our residents. And, and you can tell them they're saving, $80 a year on their garbage, which is great, but they can't get their garbage to the curb, and they would rather go back to the old system. So, and I don't want them going back to the old system because I think the new system is what's helping our diversion rates, but we've got to help them get their garbage to the curb. And it's not just the South Slope. It's also Runnymede and there's some other places like that. So I'd like to hear from staff, what can we do?
On the lane question.
On the lane question, some adjustments have been made. As you point out, there's, in a number of places, there's encroachments into the laneways by residents building fences, and in some of those cases, the residents have voluntarily pulled their encroachment back, which has allowed the truck to access it. Some of the lanes are very difficult because they're basically crooked. There's no sight line along the lane. The trucks can only pick up from one side, which effectively makes the collection width of the truck wider. They don't pick up from the back; they pick up from the side. In some of the older parts of Coquitlam, there's dead end lanes. And so that would mean that trucks would have to back out. I don't know how they were done before, but I presume that's exactly what they did before. The only other option for individual residents is for enhanced service, whereby the contractor would go to the person's house and take their cart and take it down to the truck and empty it. And there is an additional cost for that, and that's certainly an option that we can explore and come up with a scheme for payment options on that.
One suggestion that somebody had made is, and this is a resident, she said, I said, well, you could, you know, when I talked to her, I said, well, you can go to a smaller can. And she said, well, I can't get everything into the smaller can. And we had the discussion about diversion and everything. But then I said, that thought to me, maybe we give her 2 small cans instead of a medium-sized can. Because you know, she clearly has trouble lifting. I said, how did you do it before? Well, I said, I had 2 small cans. And not only that, she, of course, just went from her garage 10 feet out to the lane. So I think this is a bigger problem than we anticipated. I'm a little, you know, frustrated in that, you know, when this contract was bid, that we didn't know about it. I was led to believe that that we weren't going to have these problems. At least certainly I didn't realize it. We've heard other communities the transition was easy. Well, maybe those communities were flat. It seems to be more of an issue on the areas where there are hills, such as, you know, Edgar, Stewart, Charlin, all in that section where they have the older lanes. But I think we've got to find a way to help these people, whether or not in that neighborhood we have to run the old style truck with 2 guys there. I don't want to go back to that, but clearly there are some residents that are not able to manage this new system. In some cases, the system was in place for 2 weeks and then they lost it. So I don't know if that was a case of that the contractor just discovered it wasn't working or it was too much work, but you know, they should have figured that out before they bid the job.
Your Worship, they did drive the laneways, but not with an actual garbage truck because they hadn't received them at that point. So they did try to emulate what their trucking would be like, and they did advise us on some of the lanes, but it wasn't until they actually tried to make the collections that they learned that it wasn't working. In some cases where the carts cannot be put flush against the fence in somebody's backyard. They have to be moved off the fence, otherwise when they go to pick up the cart, it hits the fence. There's, if you've seen how they lift the carts, the motion is not vertical entirely, there's a bit of an arc to it. And so the carts would have to be placed maybe into the travel portion of these of some of the narrow lanes. But if 2 small waste cans, garbage cans, would be the solution for some people, that could probably be adjusted. Right now, the solid waste bylaw only allows 1 garbage can per residence. That requirement comes up every year with the rate setting in the solid waste bylaw, so that kind of condition could be adjusted.
Okay. And yeah, okay, that's fine. I think that's something that we definitely want to look at is you know, possibly the option to go to the 2 small to the 2 small cans. But clearly, I think that as I said earlier, I think we have to go back and look at some of this and look for some solutions on these lanes, and you know, whether it's the way they're picked up, whatever. I think we have to do something. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Reid.
Okay, I just heard
Councillor Reid had, oh no, actually they both have spoken, you're right. Okay, Councillor Sikora first and then Councillor Reid.
Thank you very much.
I haven't spoken yet.
You want to give the Councillor Reid a chance to talk?
I tried, yep. Okay, Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I just heard you say that we can't do something that is total common sense and practical because it doesn't go with the bylaw. Why wouldn't we change the bylaw if it will work out on the street? I know that's probably a silly question, but.
Well, the idea, Your Worship, on the garbage cans, limiting the number of garbage cans that people could have is to try and encourage reduction of their waste generation. There was no intent to. But we're now
talking about folks that can't lift those great big ugly cans and they need 2 little ones. So there's got to be some common sense here. I mean, if we've written a bylaw that isn't practical and doesn't work, then let's change the bylaw instead of redoing the lanes, getting different trucks and buying different cans. I mean, you know, I think we got to use a bit of common sense here. So that's one thing. And the second point is, it's the province that came in with this brilliant idea of having the producers pick up all the waste, the new recycling. Well, if they can't pick up their waste, then they better figure out a way how to or not produce it. So if they can't start figuring out a way to pick up all this plastic wrap and the stuff that we haven't got so far, then they better tell all their businesses to stop using it. Go use something else. I mean, there just has to be some common sense here, because otherwise we're going to have bylaw books that are this big to start compensating for every piece of refuse that we have, no matter what it is. And I just think this is getting a little silly. Frankly, it would be much cheaper to do what they did in the 1940s, put everything in one can and let it go. At the rate we're going, we're going to have a lineup of 10 different colored cans, and you're only allowed to take so many things, and some things that they produce you're not allowed to get rid of, so you shouldn't be able to get them in the first place. I think there's got to be some common sense applied here, and I'm just finding it a little frustrating to be sitting listening to all this, because you guys bend over backwards to help people, but I really think that maybe we need to talk to the province about some of the things that they won't pick up, that yet they're still allowing to be produced and be used. That's it. I just wanted to whine.
Okay, and on the point of the bylaw, I mean, clearly the bylaw's goal, if the bylaw's goal was to reduce the amount of garbage, then we have this limit of 360 liters. We don't have a limit of 1 can. We have a limit of 360 liters in order to reduce the amount of garbage. Under special circumstances, clearly we should be able to opt for where there's extenuating circumstances for some other combination of garbage container, garbage cart that gets us to a maximum that's below 360. And so maybe that's the change we need to make to the bylaw, if it's simply bylaw language, in order to still allow 360, but it could be in 2 different carts.
Or 380s, or...
Thank you for that. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to read this item. The program does provide seasonal limited yard waste collection in the fall and the spring, November and April respectively, when the highest tonnage of yard waste are generated. In addition, the city continues to provide free yard waste drop-off at the Coquitlam residents at Waste Act Construction Recycling Facility in United Boulevard. Now, you know, and precisely what I got a few calls about. The guy saying, look, I get a bill for garbage collection. I get a bill for water and sewer. I pay it. And then I got to drive my stuff to take it down to the garbage dump. He says, what kind of service is that? Now you try and answer that one. You know, try and answer a resident that is saying, I'm paying the price to get it looked after. Why is not looked after? See? Here's the situation. And you know what? Really, I think we've been had by this contract that we bid for, and we got, and we signed. And you know, I think what we should have said to the contractor, drive the city and give us the same kind of pickup as before, whether it was in the lane, on the street, or whatever it was, but we didn't. So what happens? We sit at the city hall and everything looks rosy. When in reality, it's not that simple. You know, and if something is simple, we somehow seem to think, oh, it's too simple, it can't be right. So we got to throw a curve at it because it's too simple. You know? So, you know, look, I'll tell you, I hate to be critical, but I'll tell you what, it has to change. It has to change. Service has got to be much better. The taxpayers are paying high taxes. They're getting the bills besides the taxes, and they're not getting the service. We seem to be going down in service instead of up in service in this community. And when is it going to stop? You know, and Councillor Reid is correct. You know, I mean, if something doesn't work because of the bylaw, very simple. We're here on a weekly basis. Change the bylaw. I mean, very, very simple. Or is it so complicated that you can't bring it forward to council members to change? You know, I'll tell you, I'm sorry, but you know what? The longer I've sat here for 42 years, the more depressed I'm getting of what's happening here in this city. I really am. very depressed, because I'll tell you, things are just going downhill, 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 and downhill. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'll have one last comment here, if I could. I've actually asked people in Coquitlam, not just wait till someone brings it up, because no one brings it up if it's going really smoothly. I ask, and the vast majority of people say this is a better system. They like it. They point out issues with it. Perhaps the lane is an issue, and I'll echo those that say, why on earth did we not have a requirement for due diligence? Drive the darn lanes, and then tell us how many lanes that you're going to have to reverse as you're bidding the process. I recognize the dead-end lanes are a challenge if you don't have a swamper. The swamper could guide you back as you're backing into or backing out of the lane at the dead end. But if you don't have a swamper, how on earth do you do that? I say, well, get video on the back of your truck. These are brand new trucks. We could have done that. There should be a solution in the offing, and it could even be a truck with swampers that goes around once a week and does 28 lanes and be done with it. As for the, I have a neighbor on the green waste. This is a great savings. This is not a greater expense. My neighbor used to use 2, 3, 5, sometimes 6 bags of green waste, and he'd have them out every week for the summer months, spring, summer, and sometimes fall. And he actually reports that he now saves, they're about $2 a bag, $1.50 a bag. He now saves about $150 a year by his calculations, because he's just got 2 big carts. He's got 2 of the 360s, and he puts them out every week. There's one of them's full, or 2 of them are full. Contemplating getting another cart ourselves, because I think that's a really good solution. Having the unlimited bags in spring and fall, I think that's a great solution. I really think that there is no reason why you'd have to put your stuff in a truck and take it down to the United Boulevard unless something unusual happened, like you've decided to remove a large tree or a large hedge or something like that. Have to get a permit, you say, yes. So I'm, the community, we've got some issues to still work through. I believe that the vast majority of people in Coquitlam like the new service, but I want us to find the solutions to the issues, particularly for people with disabilities, for seniors, and for those challenged with the switch over from the lane to the front street. Now, the motion would be to receive.
It has been moved.
We did that already?
It's been done, yes.
That's right. We moved on to the other item, and then one person pushed his button, and we all started talking. That's the right button, yeah. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. The next item, item 5, pertains to the Stream and Drainage System Protection Bylaw number 4403. This is an implementation update, and the report is before you for information.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
I'm going to be very quick on this, but I will receive it, obviously. But to our new engineer, since we started doing work up on Burke Mountain specifically, I guess I'm not being cheeky, but I am being cheeky. I guess the engineering books of 10 or 15 years ago when we first started had certain qualifications, certain scenarios in them, what would work on a 100-year flood and 10-year and 5-year and all that stuff. And I would assume that we went along and did all our bylaws and all our enforcement efforts and everything to go along with the then, I guess, appropriate engineering figures. It has become so clear to us in the last 5 years that what we have in our bylaws is not working. And fortunately, we have people up on the hill like Janet and Sandra who really keep an eye on things. I was up there on the Friday, and it's just a nightmare. We have a lot of good developers up there who are following our guidelines, and my point is I don't know that we have the right guidelines. I don't know if they need to be enhanced or changed. I don't know, and this is clearly something that I guess no one can figure out, but 15 years ago when we started up there, perhaps the climate wasn't the same as it is today, and therefore we have to be looking at new guidelines. So when I see that you're going to do some changes, I'm wondering if these are the appropriate changes, or should we be making more? And I'd like to have a fuller discussion on this than just these 2 pages. I really think that we're at the point where we're a fair way into our development up there, but as we continue, we're going to get into more slope and further up the mountain and more rain, and I would really like to hear from you before I do anything. I really want to take a good look at this.
Yes, through your worship, there's no question that the frequency of heavier rainfall events have increased in the recent past. Without speculating on the causes of that, it's safe to say that it's probably time for the city of Coquitlam to review the design criteria. So I'm more than prepared to promise that we'll review the design criteria, and we'll come back to council at another council and committee meeting where we could explain based on facts what has changed, what changes we think might be appropriate, what the impacts of those changes may be, and then we would take it from there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Zerillo.
Thank you. I just had 2 quick comments on this. Well, the first one was I had the opportunity to sit with some of the planning staff last week on the incident that happened at Dayton and Highland. And I thank you very much that you're going to relook at the rain curves and stuff like that. So I really much appreciate that. Second is just about the fines. The fine right now is $500, I believe. And I remember when this came up, I was fairly new on council, and I believe I did mention at the time that I didn't think $500 was enough. When this comes back, perhaps maybe there is an opportunity to increase the fine, because I think budgeting in $500 is something that is not doable, and I'd just like to see the fine increased for these displacements of contaminated water. I think it's important. It's devastating to the community when it happens, not that devastating when it's only a $500 fine to the agency that caused the accident. That's all.
Thank you. Councilor, oops, where'd you go? Councilor Neal, sorry.
Oh, thanks. I don't know what's gone wrong here, but I'm wondering if when the bylaw was put in place just a little while ago and calculations were done, what sort of statistics we had on rainfall in the area. And I ask that because it's always struck me as a very, very heavy rainfall area on Burke Mountain. And I remember years ago when I was doing a story related to weather, finding actually the weather station results for the Coquitlam Lake weather station. And it was very dramatic. And I couldn't find all the stats again over the weekend, but I wanted to just give you this as a comparison here. In 1974, in White Rock, there was about 1,100 millimeters of rain at one of the White Rock stations. In Carrisdale, about 1,500. In central Coquitlam, they had a station around Coma Lake, 2,200. That's all precipitation, rain and snow. The snow is measured at a melted value. But a Coquitlam Lake weather station was 3,800. That's 3.8 meters worth of rain, just for that 1 year. And that wasn't an anomaly. There were 20-year averages that I found. The Coquitlam Lake wasn't part of that, but the huge differences. White Rock 20-year average was about 1,000 meters. Carrisdale about 1,500. Coma Lake, Coquitlam about 1,900. And all the stats that I looked at, there was an actual 20-year average for 81 to 2010. Well, that's a 30-year average, isn't it? there wasn't one, but I looked at a whole bunch of different stats for the Coquitlam Lake area, and all well in excess, or most of them in excess of 3,000. So it's a very, very, very heavy rainfall area. So whatever we do, tweaking, changing, amending, let's make sure that we realize what an area this is. That's the Coquitlam Lake, which is just up behind on the west side of the Burke Mountain there. That's gets an incredible amount of precipitation every year. And so right on Burke Mountain, you can't think that it's going to be there very much different. And one way or the other, we have to, I remember mentioning this when we were talking about our Partington Creek neighborhood plan. Let's take into account, please, the fact that we get a ton of rain up there, and that we're visioning, we should keep that in mind, covered areas and things like that. So, I mean, it's not all a negative that's that much rain. It's an amazing resource with all that fresh water as well. But it's a very different area, and you know, people hear about Vancouver's rainfall, and that's a YVR, and that's can be about a third of the rainfall that actually falls on the Coquitlam Lake Weather Station, which is right by Burke Mountain. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Rasmussen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the report, staff. As somebody that lives on Burke Mountain and knows the rainfall, especially any mountainous area onto the north side gets more rainfall than anything towards the water. One of the things I've been consistent on this council has been for pushing for improvements in our drainage and the inspection of it. I was one of the people pushing for the environmental services worksite bylaw, an officer that was created. I was one of the people that was pushing behind the updating of the stream and drainage bylaw that came in 2012 and updating that. I was also very vocal in pushing for the second environmental worksite officer on there. This is something I've been pushing for better regulations, better performance measures on runoff, on siltation, on Burke Mountain. I think most of the staff would know that I've raised this issue on a number of occasions. I think, you know, the regulations are there to deal with a lot of this. I think we need to be more diligent on our inspections and more rigid in our expectation. I think sometimes we are maybe too accommodating to some of the developers and not being as rigid to them, and the application of the new bylaws. Remember, it's just 2012 that we updated this from the 2002, and when I saw that report and the increase in the recognition of rainfall, how Coquitlam is a high rainfall area in that report, how the slopes in the area, especially going to Park Creek, were taken into consideration in that report, I was very pleased at how we are now being a lot more proactive to the conditions that we're building in. But we need, most of the builders up there do it right. Some of the biggest issues up there in that rainfall was the failure to tarp up open ground. And on the Dayton one, that was the biggest reasons. They for some reason, what I found out, thought it wasn't going to rain so hard, and they were hoping to maybe pave the next day, and they didn't tarp up. If they had tarped up, they wouldn't have had the problem that they have had. As for the fine, the 500 is a maximum under our BEN, our municipal ticketing powers that we have. We can go to 1,000 through the provincial system, but that can be involved. Court challenges can be expensive. What I've always advocated for and told staff to do, the most effective method and costly method to a developer is to shut them down until they're fully compliant again. And that's where I would like to see the more rigidity from staff to shut these people down. One of the issues I've asked staff at this present time and had raised, it came up in another council report, and I would like to make sure that it's on the staff's work plan, is retaining walls and upping our retaining wall bylaw standards in Coquitlam, especially as we move into Partington Creek. There have been issues raised I've brought to council on retaining walls and showed some examples from concerned people up there. So I think that needs a relook as we move into this area. But I do think that our inspectors that are out there need to do more diligent inspections of the whole site. And when we do, from our senior staff that have the powers, when our environmental officers recommend problems, to don't give grace, shut them down, and realize that in Coquitlam, if you're not complying, we'll just shut you down until you do comply, and that will be the biggest cost and trouble, and they will learn really quickly not to make these type of mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you. I remember saying the same thing a year ago. We're not going to be able to get a fine big enough to be not simply a cost of doing business for some of the developers. I think most of the developers up there take it personally when something goes wrong on their site, and they're very, very careful and diligent to make sure it doesn't happen. But in order to make it so that those who aren't as concerned as we are with this, that they comply, that they go that they make sure that they don't take a shortcut. We've got to remove their right to continue. The cost of money is enormous. The cost of time is enormous for some of them, and that's the way to hit them and make sure that we have teeth in our bylaws. As far as the bylaws, I'd like to see us look at the regs again to make sure that we've got the right numbers in them, to redesign them if necessary. It's not, with deference to Councillor O'Neill, it's not the average year of rainfall. It's not even the average hour of rainfall. It's the peak hour. What's the highest amount of rainfall we can get in an hour in a year in any particular area? And we know that up there we've experienced some enormous peaks. When I was in Saskatoon 2 years ago, I did a study tour of some of their storm management and sanitary sewer management issues that they actually took us to the large lakes, the dry lakes that they've created in response to their challenge. And their challenge is that they've had 3 200-year floods in the last decade. That's in 10 years, they've had 3 floods that you should only get once every 200 years. Life has changed, and the climate has changed. The incidence of severe weather events has changed. The predictability is way off, and so we have to start looking at those peak hours with a critical eye to make sure that we've, if anything, over-designed so we don't end up with those failures. Now, recognize that this is a failure that flooded streets in Port Coquitlam, massive amount of damage in some areas of Port Coquitlam, for example. This wasn't limited to the mountain, but we have to make sure that the way we develop is takes into account that peak hour of rainfall. Councillor Wilson.
I just wanted to wholeheartedly agree with you. Right? I think things are different. I think average rainfall is one thing, but I think we're getting a lot more extreme weather events, and I think we have to really make sure that we review this and make sure that the regulations we have now are tough enough, and if they're not tough enough, then we toughen them up. And I also agree with Councillor Asmussen that we have strong enforcement, and it's good that we've added a third bylaw officer during the peak period. So, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we piped in on that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing none others, this began with no motion, so we'll need a motion. Moved by Councillor Asmussen to receive. Okay. Second by Councillor O'Neill. Yeah. Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Next item, item 6, is an update on the Burke Mountain Firehall project and pertaining to budget and construction. This is the third update presented to the committee. We have introductory comments and presentation by the General Manager of Strategic Initiatives. Reports before you for information.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill to receive, seconded by Councillor Asmussen. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. With our thanks.
There were some exciting pictures. Which I'll move through quickly.
Ooh, thank you.
You, of course, can drive and see it yourself live.
Coming to a theater near you.
That's right.
They're actually... those pictures actually are available on the internet at the council agenda item.
There are 4 other business items. OB1 concerns business taxes and was raised by Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess everybody's had a lot of circulated phone by a gentleman You had your letter circulated by a gentleman that has a business in Coquitlam. He used to pay $80,000 last year for business taxes, licenses rather. This year it's $200 and some odd, which has gone up 147%. And he went on to say to me that he...
Excuse me, you made a business license.
Business license, that's what he said, business license, that's what I said.
Your item was the business taxes, but okay, it's business license fees.
The fact is, licenses from from $80 to $200 some odd, 147% increase. And he said, you know what, Lou? Funny thing, I don't even do any business in Coquitlam. My offices are in Coquitlam, but I mainly do business with other municipalities outside of Coquitlam. So I'm just wondering, is this a trend that everybody went up the same amount on business licenses, or what is happening?
You voted on that. That was the adjustment of the business license fees. I think it was revenue neutral, but Mr. Dumont.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Yeah, Council will recall we updated our business license bylaw, and through that process we went from, I think it was around 50 categories down to about 8. We were simplifying the business license bylaw. Overall, we're actually collecting a little bit less money than we were under the old bylaw, but it did redistribute some of the categories. So it is possible that that particular gentleman's fee might have went up. I mean, there was rationale for why we adjusted them the way we did. Like I say, overall there was it was basically revenue neutral, but there was some that went up, some that went down, and some that would have stayed the same.
Well, but is that a rationale to up the business licenses at 147%? Because what was the rationale for upping it up by 147% in 1 year?
I'm not familiar with the particular example, so I can't really speak to that issue. The rationale for updating our business bylaw was to, our business licensing bylaw was to simplify it and to make it easier for customers getting business licenses, as well as to make it more equitable.
No wonder we lost 500 or 400 some odd jobs here in Coquitlam in the last year. I can see why. Thank you.
Okay, well, to be clear, it was actually a revenue neutral, or intended to be revenue neutral change that we all voted on. It allowed that, I guess, the $80 a year. I'm not sure anyone's going to move their home and business out of the community for the sake of 30 cents a day in business license fee. Our business license fee is still very competitive with other communities, and I don't think any councillor raised any issues related to that one. But okay, Mr. Clerk.
The next item, OB2, concerns buses for Burke Mountain, was raised by Councillor Hodge.
Yes, thank you. As I think most of council is aware, the school district discontinued bus service within the District 43. And one of the areas that was particularly impacted by that was the Burke Mountain, because of course we don't have schools up there. Most of the students up there travel and use that school bus, particularly the secondary school students who are traveling down to Terry Fox and to Minnetonka and Quay. When we learned that the bus service was being discontinued, I sent a letter over to TransLink just to give them the heads up. I believe that the school district was in communication with them as well. And unfortunately, what has happened is I've started receiving several emails, sort of third day of school, saying that the bus service was not picking up the kids because the bus was full. And this is particularly the new 188, which travels down David and down Coast Meridian. So what we have is that kids who thought they were going to be able to use that, new riders, people that we've talked about this around this council table, about when people start to learn how to use a bus, this is when you want to get them on there. So my son was one of those kids as well, who's 14 years old, thought that he was going to be taking the bus for the first time, and we sent him off to school with his $1.75, and an hour later we got a phone call saying, "Mom, the bus didn't stop for me, what do I do?" And so we've had parents up on Burke Mountain who've been getting phone calls at home, at work, saying, "The bus just drove by, left us here." So I talked with TransLink, and they tell me, well, no, sorry, we didn't get enough notice. Apparently 4 months wasn't enough. They've also said that apparently what they'd run during the day is the community shuttle. Now, we as council received the ridership numbers for the 188, and it's very good. In fact, all of council was pushing for that service, and when that service was put in place, there are times when it is already near capacity. Unfortunately, what I didn't realize when I saw the numbers is when it said there's 25 on average 25 people an hour riding the bus at that time period. What I didn't realize was it's a community shuttle, which I don't even think barely holds 25 people. So that would account for why there's 15 kids that today in the rain are making other arrangements to get home from Fox. It's a 5-kilometer hike in the rain, and I feel that those kids would be better off if they had that time at home doing schoolwork and homework. So I'd like council to once again, and we've done this in the past, but I think that I'd like to see council write a letter to Transit, let them know that that we're disappointed in the level of service, and that particularly during the school rush hour, we've got to make sure that we've got proper buses on so that those kids can use the bus and learn how to use public transit. And it's not great service. It doesn't go all the way up the mountain, but there were at least half a dozen kids that were planning to use that, and more that were left on the side of the curb this week.
Thank you. I actually have a little bit of information to share with council, because that issue was raised by, well, actually, Councillor Hodge on social media as well, a number of people. I was immediately in touch with executives at TransLink. I spoke with Vice President Bob Padden. His initial reply, actually earlier today, was that the 188 now converts to a 40-foot bus when it leaves Poco Depot at 3:18. Unfortunately, and that's the challenge, is that it doesn't leave before school ends. It leaves Poco Depot to arrive to pick up students half an hour after, and that's the first 40-foot bus. It said further that unfortunately we were notified of School District 43's decision to cancel school bus service after we had made commitments with our drivers for the September schedule. There seems to be some confusion there, because I know that our staff raised the issue of the canceling of school bus service back in May at a meeting. It's in the meetings. I raised it with the Mayor's Council. I know Councillor Asmussen has raised it. I know you've raised it, and the school board has raised it. So TransLink, for whatever reason, didn't make the change. They've now committed to start 40-foot buses, but the challenge is that the next schedule change, I guess, is in December.
Middle of December.
Which I said is ridiculous, and so he got back to me one more time a few minutes ago and said, "Thank you for your note. We will continue to work with our team to see what we can do." This is one of the challenges that, first of all, we need better bus service up there. We need bus service properly up there, and we don't have it. But this particular one, where they're using a community shuttle at a time when school is out, and we need to get those students home safely, we need a better response. I've made it clear to him that a better response is demanded, and he has made it clear to me that he's going to work. He's going to do what he can, and I would suggest that your letter is a good idea. We should make it very clear to him that to TransLink, that this needs to be resolved urgently. And I'm talking a week or 2 weeks or something to try to find a solution. Send another community shuttle up. Send a second bus. I don't care what you have to do. So I've got Councillor Asmussen, who probably knows more about this.
Well, yes. We did inform Transit. Councillor Hodge back in May. Myself, being a driver in the system, contacted people there. Our union has a scheduling, what we call a sheet committee, to deal with the schedules coming up. Changes could have been made up until about just before the beginning of July, because we sign our sheet at the end of July, middle through. So the issue is a couple of things that are going on right now. One is funding for service. The other is Mr. Curley's report, unfortunately, said Coast Mountain Bus Company had too many spares and to get rid of their spares. So they've got rid of their extra spare buses down to what's considered the optimal level. Well, the reality is we don't have enough buses now to help with the gaps that we're having. The problem on the 188 is, yes, there are community shuttles are 20 people sitting, 4 people standing max. That's what a community shuttle does. My philosophy always has been that we should be really dealing with 40-footers and 60-footers because we're a mass transit, we're not, and they fill up too fast. There's only so many buses to go around. We also have another problem, it's just not Burke Mountain. There's other issues in this city. If you want to go to SFU right now, and you're along Como Lake, you can wait an hour for a 143 to pick you up because it's going by full, each and every bus down Como Lake because they fill up. People are taking the bus from Como Lake down to the exchange to get on the bus to get through. We don't have the buses right now even to fill that gap right now and the service out there. But I think sending a letter to Transit, I think a letter to the Mayor's Council to fix this funding issue, because no, I'm just saying the funding's the issue.
I wish we'd have thought of that.
I know, but funding's the issue. But also, when we looked at the report and getting rid of the spare buses, and now you don't have any extra buses, if you did have the service time, to put out there to service the need that's out there. I think sending a letter to Mr. Padden again would help. But once again, we've had these discussions with TransLink, and I think to Councillor Hodge and myself, we said, no, I've made a suggestion to TransLink. They have 2 school shuttle buses that run from Terry Fox up around through River Springs, and I've said, take that service time and extend the 188 up around the Hazel Drive, Harper, back down again, even just in the morning, afternoon rush hour, because we have runs that just strictly do morning, afternoon, rush hour. They haven't picked up on that suggestion. I raised this at our a week and a half ago, we had our Tri-City Transportation Task Force that I'm a member of. We had our presentation. I'll talk to Council later about the upcoming route changes for the SkyTrain integration. But I raised the 188, I raised the 143 issues, the pickup, the pass-ups on passengers here, and the lack of service. What the issue is, and when you had your report earlier, is that the way TransLink has changed their guidelines. I think Catherine Mahork pointed that out. We're no longer a general coverage area. It's about higher service areas and not giving it up to lower service areas. So that's another issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zerillo.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to mention it's an unfortunate situation that's happening on Burke Mountain, and the solution, I think, is, we need a short-term fix right now, but it's really about getting the school up on Burke Mountain. So I'd like to see the staff more focused on advocating for the school over the buses at this point in time, because that'll solve the problem. But about the 143, absolutely. I've heard this on the doorstep, pass-ups, like 3 pass-ups, and we're talking about people that they're trying to get to work, that it's their income for their family that they can't get to work on the 143. So it's a definite issue on that one too. But yeah, we need to do something about the schools, and I know that this council doesn't have a big appetite for getting into the provincial sandbox, but I think we need to do more. We need to. I don't know what the answer is there, but we need to do more to get those schools going on Burke Mountain. Thank you.
Well, I'll assure Council that, in fact, almost all of our discussions at UBCM were about schools in Burke Mountain. We've got a team of staff that are trying to work with the school district to get the schools built. I'm not sure what more we could do, but we're very focused on it. This one here is a transportation issue, and so it's a different group of staff. Councillor Reid.
I am not joking when I say I'm prepared to look for a private bus company. If TransLink can't do the job, and I have little kids, and it's now October and it's wet and cold out, and and it's still daylight, they're not going to stand out there in the dark. So if TransLink can't provide buses, then maybe we should be finding out where the old school buses are and trying to find somebody that can do school runs as a private business.
Don't think it hasn't been discussed.
Oh, well, it's being discussed again, because I think maybe that might be the solution.
Okay. I'm going to take council's direction that the letter will go out in the morning. No, we're going to have it in parliamentary language. With a few exclamation points.
We will record that. See no dissent on that approach. We will record that as directions that the city write letter to translate and capture this conversation.
Okay.
The next other business item is OB3, and it concerns Dogwood Pavilion. It was raised by Councillor O'Neill.
Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a good coincidence that the display panels for the Parks, Rec and Culture Master Plan are out there right now, because I believe there's some sort of misunderstanding that's out there in the community, especially around the Dogwood Center, about what the future of the Dogwood Pavilion is. So I've received a couple of reports now, indirectly and directly, about concerns that are kind of boiling around within the Dogwood Pavilion about whether or not the Dogwood Pavilion is slated for demolition, and they seem to think that the master plan seems to indicate that. And the only thing I can find on the master plan that might give them might get them thinking in that direction, but shouldn't, is on page 72, which talks about community centers programs. Program facilities aimed at the 50-plus age group are not matched to emerging needs of the boomer generation. Alternative community-based delivery alternatives need to be explored. And the other one, just a paragraph down or two, is the Poirier West Master Plan for the west side of Poirier Precinct identified plans to decommission Chimo Pool, replace Dogwood Pavilion, demolish Poirier Community Center and 640 Poirier, the Poirier Administration Office Building. So there it says replace and not demolish. But anyway, somehow the concerns are out there, and I want to know what, I just want to make sure that we understand that we can answer these concerns, and B, that our already extensive consultation is going to be directed specifically at current user groups as well, including Dogwood, Glen Pine, and those sorts of things. So I want to make sure that they fully understand what the master plan is about and how no plans are written in stone right now, and that this is a living document, and we certainly want to know what their feelings are. But first off, deal with this, what I'm hearing coming out of the Dogwood Pavilion about, oh, you're going to demolish our recreation center. Anyway, so perhaps one of the managers can deal with that question.
Yes, happy to do so, Your Worship. I have had this issue raised in the last week as well by other council members, also hearing the rumors. I can assure council there's no basis for the rumors at all. There's no truth in the comments around any plans that staff may have around Dogwood or any of our facilities. I appreciate Councillor O'Neill's references noted in the master plan. Those are the only references we're familiar with in terms of any discussion around Dogwood. The master plan is generating discussion around, broad picture ideas and philosophy and strategic directions around the long-term planning and need for long-term planning for all our facilities. These are older buildings. The Poirier Complex has a couple of older buildings, and we have to think long-term around the replacement of those facilities. But clearly, staff would never make any overtures. The seniors population is actually growing as we go forward. Over the next 15, 20 years, we have to actually expand senior services, or 50-plus services. So clearly our plans long-term would be to enhance those services, and certainly staff have no intent, and we would not do any such planning without council's authority and working with those boards and the representative of those groups that are part of our community providing those services. So certainly can put those rumors to rest. There is no intent at all by staff or any overtures made in those consultation sessions with those groups around those facilities. They will remain and programming will continue.
Good, thank you. And I know that when council voted on this on June 9th unanimously to move this forward, we did talk about the need for extensive public consultation with all the groups, and we did talk about the aging population and the need to provide opportunities for that population to stay active. We also talked about the diversity in the community, the changing demands for services and programs. So Yeah, there's a lot of things, a lot of balls in the air on this one, but we were all of one mind in council that right at the top, we need to find out what the people think about this. The consultation is incredibly important, and so I don't know if anybody's still watching out there, but or listening in, but I'm glad that the general manager was able to put that rumor to rest. Thank you.
Thank you. Several of us had heard these. I actually was there at Dogwood today, and I noticed there's a sticker. We have the same boards at Dogwood, and they have the little red dots that they can put their concerns or next to their concerns or next to their priorities, and then there's a spot to write in additional priorities, and one of the additional priorities written down was maintain Dogwood. Dogwood, I started working there 35 years ago. It was amazing then. It's amazing today. It's the best facility of its kind from my perspective, and we would never, I know this council has no interest in making changes to Dogwood, so we just, in fact, there was one element you identified, or replace Dogwood was one of the line items on Poirier West. That was written in 2005, I think it was. At the time, the pool was still standing. And we had to demolish the pool, replace Dogwood was one of the recommendations. Instead, we invested $3 million into the improvements, the expansion of Dogwood, which was the other option, was replace it or expand it. And we opted to expand it. Really, just less than a decade ago, I think this is a very excellent facility, and obviously very passionately appreciated by the members of Dogwood, and I want to assure them that there's no changes there. Thank you.
One more.
The final OB item, OB4, concerns microbreweries and was raised by Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, and this was one that I thought was probably going to be just a rumor as well, but I was informed quite recently that because of the changes that we're making in our business zones and everything like that, it was impossible for someone to set up a microbrewery here in Coquitlam. You can do it at Yellow Dog and Port Moody. You can have a microbrewery. A young friend of mine just opened one in Westminster, Oak and Steel. But for some reason, we're fearing the beer, and we weren't allowing somehow, whether it was an oversight or deliberate, it was certainly never talked about around council, some of these wonderful little microbreweries that are opening up with little bars in them and things like that. So I'm wondering if the general manager of planning can address this, and be quick or hop to it, please. Thank you.
Yes. Are we really declining the Stein? Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Worship. It's not quite Oktoberfest, so we can hop along here. No, it is true. In fact, we got that feedback through the industrial zone update consultation we did recently. It's a bit of a glitch. It's a gap in our zoning right now. It's a business type, I guess, it's evolved. Currently, you can have a brewery, if you wish, in Coquitlam in our industrial zones as a processing operation. You can have U-brews for wine and beer making in our commercial districts, but you can't kind of combine the two and sell the product of a brewery. So we note that this is a gap. We are looking at that through our industrial zone review. If there is a party that's interested in pursuing a site for a zoning, we would be happy to talk with them. We are aware of this and working on this.
So it may be microbreweries, but it's a macro gap then. It's a big problem. So regardless of whether or not there's somebody actively pursuing this, it's something we have to change, because we don't want this controversy to brew any longer. Thank you.
I would entertain a motion to repair the gap and ask for a staff report on how to do that quickly.
Yeah, I would move that.
So many ideas.
Do I have a seconder?
All right, I'll take May as. Yep. Okay. Moved by. Oh, was it? It doesn't matter. Okay. Moved by Councillor O'Neill, seconded by Councillor Reid for a staff report to repair this gap. Any discussion on that? Any discussion on that? All in favor? Opposed? Raise your glass. Passed unanimously.
May we record that as directions rather than take it through?
Of course.
Thank you.
hop to it.
Mr. Chair, that's the final item on this agenda.
I'd heard a motion to adjourn from Councillor Asmundson. It's seconded by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you all.